Alexander, Alex Morrison, stood in the dimly lit motel bathroom, studying a stranger's reflection. His signature salt and pepper hair, once meticulously styled by Manhattan's finest barbers, was now hidden beneath a worn Red Sox cap, dyed a flat brown that aged him backward instead of forward. The crisp Italian suits that had graced countless Forbes covers were replaced by faded jeans and a flannel shirt from Goodwill, both chosen specifically because they hung awkwardly on his athletic frame. A week's worth of untrimmed beard completed his transformation from polished CEO to desperate job seeker. But it was his eyes that troubled him most. They still carried the sharp, calculating gaze that had helped him build TechLogic's shipping from a startup to a $2 billion empire. He would need to learn to dull that edge if he wanted to survive the next few weeks. The cheap fluorescent light buzzed overhead as Alex practiced slouching his shoulders, deliberately diminishing his usual commanding presence. The motel room, behind him, with its faded wallpaper and sagging mattress, was a far cry from his penthouse overlooking Central Park. But it was perfect for his new identity. James Jimmy Parker, a former office supplies warehouse worker who'd lost his job to automation and was desperate enough to take any position, even at a facility 3 states away from his supposed home. His transformation hadn't started with the beard or the clothes. It had begun 3 weeks ago in his top-floor office, when a handwritten letter arrived among the usual stack of corporate reports and shareholders' updates. Unlike the anonymous complaints he occasionally received, this one was different. The paper was cheap, the handwriting shaky, but the words burned with an authenticity that had kept him awake for nights. Mr. Morrison, I know you think you built a good company, but there's something rotten at the heart of it, something that's killing us slowly. Not just profits or productivity, it's killing actual people. I've worked at your Boston warehouse for 15 years. What I've seen in the last 3 would break your heart, if you still have one. The letter went on to detail allegations that seemed impossible in his carefully constructed corporate ecosystem. Systematic harassment, dangerous working conditions, and hints of something even darker. His first instinct had been to launch an internal investigation, but 20 years in business had taught him that formal inquiries often buried problems deeper instead of solving them. The more he thought about that letter, the more he realized he'd lost touch with the foundation of his company, the warehouses that had launched his initial success. Alex had built TechLogic's from the ground up, starting with a single warehouse and a revolutionary logistics algorithm. But somewhere between the IPO and the global expansion, he'd retreated into the world of boardrooms and balance sheets, trusting others to maintain the principles he'd established. Now, as he meticulously applied spirit gum to attach the fake scar along his jawline, part of his constructed backstory about a workplace accident, he wondered how many other warning signs he'd missed over the years. The transformation into Jimmy Parker had been methodical. He'd spent weeks constructing the identity, a divorced father of 2, behind on child support, with a spotty employment history that made him seem desperate but not suspicious. He'd practiced his backstory until it felt like genuine memory, right down to the name of the supervisor who'd allegedly laid him off from his last job. His usual precise diction had been replaced by a slight Boston accent, carefully studied but not overdone. The last piece of his disguise lay on the scratched Formica dresser, a pair of prescription-free glasses with slightly smudged lenses. They weren't just for show. They were carefully chosen to make him appear slightly uncertain, the kind of person others might underestimate or ignore. As he put them on, he remembered the last line of that letter. If you want to know the truth, don't send your corporate bloodhounds. Come see for yourself. But be warned, the truth might cost you everything you've built. Opening his laptop one last time before fully embracing his new identity, Alex reviewed the documents that had led him to this moment. The Boston warehouse's productivity metrics were excellent, their safety records spotless. On paper, it was one of TechLogic's best-performing facilities. But he'd learned to read between the lines. Turnover rates just slightly too low for a warehouse operation. Injury reports that followed patterns too neat to be natural. Efficiency numbers that seemed to defy the basic laws of human capability. Tomorrow morning, Jimmy Parker would join the early shift at TechLogic's Boston warehouse, just another desperate soul looking for a steady paycheck. But tonight, Alex Morrison, CEO of a billion-dollar company, stood in a 40-per-night motel room practicing how to make himself invisible. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his entire career making himself unforgettable, and now his success depended on becoming someone nobody would remember. As he finally lay down on the lumpy mattress, his mind drifted to the warehouse. Workers who'd written him over the years, their complaints filtered through layers of management until they reached his desk as sanitized summary reports. He'd trusted the system he'd built, trusted his chosen leaders to maintain the values he'd established. Now, as sleep eluded him, he wondered if that trust had been his biggest mistake. The bedside alarm was set for 4:30 a.m. In less than 6 hours, he would discover whether his elaborate deception would hold up under the fluorescent lights of his own warehouse. The last thought that crossed his mind before sleep finally claimed him was a quote from his father, who'd worked in warehouses his entire life. "The truth about any company lives on its lowest floors, son. Everything else is just pretty packaging." The drive to Boston's industrial district felt surreal in his rented 2012 Honda Civic. The car's faded paint and slight shimmy at highway speeds perfectly matching his manufactured identity. As streetlights cast intermittent shadows across the dashboard, Alex's mind wandered back to the series of events that had forced one of America's most recognized CEOs to become an invisible man. The letter hadn't been the first warning sign. 3 months ago, during TechLogic's quarterly earnings call, an analyst had pointed out an unusual pattern in their Boston facility's numbers. The warehouse was processing 40% more packages than similarly sized facilities, yet its operating costs remained suspiciously low. Alex had championed these figures as proof of his company's superior logistics algorithm. But now each data point felt like an accusation. Then came the whispers from the trucking community. Long-haul drivers had started requesting routes that specifically avoided the Boston warehouse, citing unexplained delays and hostile staff. Their complaints never made it into official reports. The local management team had dismissed them as typical driver grumbling. But in an industry where time meant money, drivers didn't avoid facilities without reason. The regional manager, Marcus Hayes, had explanations for everything. The outstanding productivity, a result of his innovative training program. The low operating costs, efficient resource allocation, the driver complaints, resistance to new loading procedures. Hayes had an answer for every question, each one perfectly crafted to satisfy corporate oversight while revealing absolutely nothing. Alex had nearly convinced himself to trust Hayes's explanations until the photos arrived. They came in a plain, manila envelope with no return address, snapshots taken inside the warehouse showing blocked fire exits, workers without safety equipment, and most disturbing of all, timestamps on security footage that didn't match the facility's official operating hours. The final photo showed a young worker being helped to a car, her face contorted in pain, while a supervisor watched with obvious indifference. His executive team had suggested their usual solution: send in the corporate audit team, led by their veteran investigator, Patricia Chen. "Give me 2 weeks," Chen had promised, "and I'll have a full report on your desk." But Alex had seen too many of Chen's reports over the years, thorough, professional, and somehow always missing the human element. They catalogued violations but never captured the why, the how, the deeper rot that allowed such violations to occur. The final push came from an unexpected source. During a routine board meeting, his oldest friend and CFO, David Sullivan, had casually mentioned that the Boston facility's worker compensation claims had dropped by 90% over the past year. "Marcus Hayes is a miracle worker," Sullivan had beamed. "We should implement his methods across all facilities." The other board members nodded enthusiastically, seeing only the positive impact on their bottom line. But Alex remembered another warehouse decades ago where he'd worked one summer during college. The facility manager there had also boasted about low injury rates until a surprise OSHA inspection revealed the truth. Workers were being threatened with termination if they reported injuries. That manager had been fired, but not before 3 workers suffered permanent disabilities that could have been prevented with proper medical care. Standing in his corporate office later that day, staring out at the Manhattan skyline, Alex had made his decision. The system he'd created, the layers of oversight and reporting meant to protect workers, had instead become a maze where truth got lost. He needed to strip away the corporate armor, the preconceptions, the power dynamic that made people tell him what they thought he wanted to hear. The plan came together over sleepless nights and secret meetings. He arranged a supposed month-long sabbatical, citing personal reasons. His executive assistant, Marie, was the only one who knew his true destination. He needed someone to maintain his digital presence and handle emergencies that couldn't wait. She'd thought he was crazy at first, but something in his determination had convinced her. "The company's rotting from the inside," he'd told her, "and I'm sitting in my tower, breathing perfumed air." Her response had been typical Marie. Practical and to the point. "Just remember, you can't fix what's broken until you understand why it broke in the first place." The preparation had been exhaustive. He'd studied warehouse procedures from the ground up, refreshing knowledge he hadn't used in decades. He'd practiced using equipment, knowing his undercover identity couldn't afford to appear completely inexperienced. Most importantly, he'd memorized the names and faces of key personnel, especially Marcus Hayes. The regional manager had risen quickly through company ranks, earning accolades for his ability to maximize efficiency. Now, Alex wondered what human cost had purchased those impressive numbers. As he pulled into the warehouse parking lot, finding a spot far from the entrance among other aging vehicles, Alex caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. Jimmy Parker stared back at him, tired, desperate, slightly unkempt, but it was his father's words that echoed in his mind. "A warehouse is like a living thing, son. If something's wrong at the heart of it, the whole body suffers." He was about to discover just how sick this particular body had become. The employee entrance loomed before him, a stark metal door, marked only by a faded personnel-only sign. Gone was the sleek corporate logo that adorned the main entrance, the one he'd walked through countless times during official visits. As Alex joined the stream of workers trudging through the early morning darkness, the familiar warehouse facade felt suddenly alien and forbidding. "Hey, Parker!" A sharp voice cut through the pre-dawn quiet. A woman in a navy blue polo shirt, emblazoned with the TechLogix logo, strode toward him, clipboard in hand. Her badge identified her as Rachel Torres, HR coordinator. "You're the 7 o'clock interview, right? You're early." Her tone carried equal parts approval and suspicion. "Yes, ma'am," Alex replied, carefully maintaining his rehearsed Boston accent. "My old supervisor always said better an hour early than a minute late." The reference to previous warehouse experience seemed to soften Torres's expression slightly. "Follow me," she said, turning toward a side entrance. "Might as well start the paperwork since you're here." As they walked, Alex noticed how workers gave Torres a wide berth, their eyes downcast as she passed. It wasn't respect he saw in their postures. It was fear. The HR office was a cramped space that smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. Motivational posters covered the walls, their cheerful messages about teamwork and perseverance feeling oddly sinister in the fluorescent lighting. Torres shuffled through a stack of papers, pulling out forms with practiced efficiency. "Your application says you worked at Office Max's distribution center," she said, not looking up. "Says it closed down. Automation?" Alex nodded, playing his part. "Yeah, robots don't need lunch breaks or health insurance." The bitter tone in his voice wasn't entirely acting. He'd seen too many workers displaced by automation, though his company prided itself on retraining rather than replacing. Torres's phone buzzed, and her expression darkened as she read the message. "Wait here," she snapped, hurrying out of the office. Through the thin walls, Alex could hear raised voices from the warehouse floor, something about a jammed conveyor, belt, and a backed-up shipping line. Left alone, he took the opportunity to observe his surroundings more carefully. The office's filing cabinet had a broken lock, and through the gap he could see personnel files stuffed haphazardly inside. On Torres's desk, a spreadsheet showed worker schedules with shift lengths that violated labor laws. Most tellingly, a stack of incident reports sat in a tray marked pending review, each one stamped invalid claim without apparent investigation. A commotion outside drew his attention. Through the office window, he watched as a worker was helped away from the conveyor belt area, limping badly. What struck Alex wasn't the injury itself, but the practiced efficiency with which other workers moved to cover the absent position, as if such incidents were routine enough to have a standard response. Torres returned, her face flushed with irritation. "Right, where were we? Oh yes, verification of employment. I'll need to call your previous supervisor at Office Max." She reached for her phone, and Alex felt a moment of tension. This was the first real test of his cover story. "Carl Matthews," he supplied helpfully, though he might have moved to the Syracuse facility after the closure. The name was carefully chosen. A real Office Max manager who had indeed transferred to Syracuse, but who had passed away 6 months ago. Any verification calls would lead to dead ends explained by corporate restructuring. "We'll sort that out later," Torres said, apparently satisfied with his quick response. "Right now we need bodies on the floor. Marcus wants all new hires processed by start of first shift." She thrust a stack of papers at him. "Sign these. Standard stuff. Non-disclosure, safety waivers, acknowledgement of at-will employment." Alex's hand hesitated over the forms. As CEO, he'd approved these documents years ago, but seeing them from this perspective revealed their true nature. The safety waivers effectively signed away workers' rights to contest unsafe conditions. The non-disclosure agreement contained clauses that would make reporting violations nearly impossible. "Problem?" Torres asked sharply, noting his hesitation. "No, ma'am," he replied, signing James Parker with deliberate awkwardness, "just making sure I understand what I'm signing." The look she gave him was calculating, marking him as someone to watch. The next hour passed in a blur of orientation videos that Alex himself had commissioned years ago. Watching them now, he noticed how they emphasized worker responsibilities while glossing over worker rights. The chipper voiceover spoke about safety protocols that, judging by his brief observations, existed only in these videos. As other new hires began arriving for their 7 o'clock appointments, Alex observed their interactions. Most showed the same desperate eagerness he was trying to project. Single parents, laid-off factory workers, people for whom this job represented not an opportunity but a last resort. A tall man with graying hair caught his attention. Unlike the others, he carried himself with the subtle confidence of someone who knew the system. As the man filled out his paperwork, Alex overheard him chatting with Torres about mutual acquaintances at other warehouses. The man's eyes occasionally swept the room with too much awareness, and Alex felt a chill of recognition. This was Likely a corporate plant, someone sent by his own security team to monitor the warehouse. "Parker!" Torres's voice snapped him back to attention. "Orientation starting. Follow me, and remember, Marcus doesn't like questions from new hires." She led the group toward a large room deeper in the facility, and Alex fell in line with the others, already feeling the weight of his assumed identity settling onto his shoulders. The warehouse he'd built, his pride and joy, now felt like an elaborate trap, and he was willingly walking into it, hoping to discover the truth before someone discovered his. The orientation room was a converted storage space with flickering, fluorescent lights and walls that couldn't quite muffle the constant drone of conveyor belts beyond. Alex sat in the back row, his borrowed clothes sticking uncomfortably to the molded plastic chair. The room's single ventilation fan labored ineffectively against the growing heat as more bodies filed in. His first major concern surfaced before the orientation even began. The emergency exit sign near the front of the room was dark, its backup battery clearly dead. More troubling was the stack of pallets partially blocking the door, a violation of fire safety codes he'd helped establish. 15 years ago, when he'd mentioned the blocked exit to Torres, her response had been tellingly dismissive. "That door's been broken for months. We're waiting on maintenance budget approval." Marcus Hayes burst into the room 10 minutes late, his crisp polo, shirt and pressed khakis standing in sharp contrast to the shabby surroundings. Alex recognized him from corporate photos, but the man's presence in person radiated an energy that camera flashes had failed to capture, part charm, part barely contained aggression. "Welcome to TechLogix," Hayes announced, pacing the front of the room like a caged predator. "Let me start by saying this isn't your typical warehouse job. We're the best in the business because we demand excellence. Our metrics are the highest in the industry, and we intend to keep them that way." As Hayes launched into his presentation, Alex noticed the first truly alarming discrepancy. The safety statistics displayed on the projected slides didn't match the numbers he'd reviewed in his office last month. According to Hayes, the facility had gone 847 days without a lost time accident, but Alex had personally signed off on 3 worker compensation claims from this warehouse in the past year alone. The next red flag came during the equipment training overview. Hayes clicked through images of forklifts and pallet jacks, rattling off operation protocols that seemed to prioritize speed over safety. "The manual says 3 points of contact when mounting," Hayes explained. "But let's be real, you need to move fast in this facility. 2 points of contact is fine if you're efficient." Alex felt his jaw tighten. He'd spent millions implementing proper safety protocols across all TechLogix facilities. Hearing them so casually dismissed by a regional manager made his blood boil, but as Jimmy Parker, he could only sit there taking notes with feigned diligence. The presentation shifted to productivity metrics, and Hayes's energy noticeably intensified. "Every movement is tracked, every second counted," he declared, pulling up a chart of scanning rates. "Top performers get bonuses, bottom performers." He let the threat hang in the air. "Well, let's just say we have a long list of people waiting for these positions." A young woman in the front row raised her hand tentatively. "The job listing mentioned regular breaks and overtime compensation." The question emerged more like a plea than an inquiry. Hayes' smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. "Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. You get 2 15-minute breaks and a 30-minute lunch. But here's what the posting didn't tell you. Those breaks start the moment you leave your station, not when you reach the break room. Factor in security checks and distance, you're looking at maybe 5 minutes of actual rest. As for overtime..." "Doom," he chuckled, the sound entirely devoid of humor. "We have ways of keeping the books balanced." Alex watched the hope drain from several faces around him. These people had come expecting a challenging but fair workplace. Instead, they were being inducted into what felt increasingly like a labor camp, dressed up in corporate efficiency metrics. The safety equipment demonstration proved equally disturbing. Hayes breezed through the proper use of back braces and safety glasses, then dropped another bombshell. Company policy requires safety equipment at all times on the floor. Company reality is that equipment is shared between shifts to save costs. You'll need to buy your own if you want guaranteed access. The final straw came during the tour of the facility. As they walked the warehouse floor, Alex noticed workers moving at an almost frantic pace. The temperature in the storage areas was stifling. The massive ventilation systems he'd approved in the facility's original design were clearly running at minimal capacity to save power. Safety barriers around high-stack storage areas were either missing or badly maintained, and worker protective equipment was conspicuously absent. But it was a seemingly minor incident that truly revealed the facility's toxic culture. As their group passed the loading docks, a worker stumbled, dropping a box of merchandise. Before anyone could react, a supervisor materialized, his voice, in carrying clearly across the space. "That's a write-up, Jenkins. 2 more and you're out." "But sir," the worker protested, "the label said £50, but this has to be at least 70. "Are you saying our inventory system is wrong?" The supervisor's tone dripped with menace. "Or maybe you're just not cut out for real work." The worker's shoulders slumped in defeat. "No, sir. Won't happen again, sir." Hayes used the incident as a teaching moment for the orientation group. "See that? Every mistake costs the company. Money, 3 strikes and you're out. That's our policy. Keeps people motivated, keeps them focused." Alex felt sick. The 3 strikes policy had been intended for serious violations, not minor accidents. Like so many of his initiatives, it had been twisted into a tool of intimidation. As the tour concluded, Hayes gathered them for a final warning. "One more thing. We've had some issues with people asking too many questions, trying to make trouble. Let me be clear. This is a right-to-work state. We can terminate your employment at any time for any reason. Keep your heads down, hit your metrics, and we'll all get along fine." Back in the orientation room, Alex watched his fellow new hires sign their final paperwork with trembling hands. In just 4 hours, he'd witnessed enough violations to justify a full corporate investigation. But paper trails could be hidden, stories could be changed, and workers could be pressured into silence. He needed more than just observations. He needed proof, and more importantly, he needed to understand how deeply this corruption ran. A movement caught his eye. The corporate plant was watching him. Their eyes met briefly, and Alex saw something unexpected in the other man's gaze. Not suspicion, but a shadow of the same horror he was feeling. Perhaps he wasn't the only one discovering the dark reality behind TechLogic's impressive numbers. By the end of his first full shift, Alex's body screamed in protest at movements he'd taken for granted his entire life. His personal trainers, carefully crafted workout routines hadn't prepared him for 12 hours of continuous lifting, bending, and rushing between stations. The cheap boots he'd bought for his disguise had rubbed his heels raw, and his shoulders burned from the constant strain of moving packages that routinely exceeded the weight limits specified in his own company's safety guidelines. His assigned Section Supervisor Keith Reeves took particular pleasure in pushing the new hires to their breaking point. "Pick up the pace, Parker," Reeves shouted for the 3rd time in an hour. "My grandmother moves faster, and she's been dead for 10 years. The warehouse echoed with harsh laughter from nearby workers, their own relief at not being the target evident in their forced mirth. Alex gritted his teeth and reached for another package, his hands trembling with exhaustion. The scanner beeped accusingly. Too slow, always too slow. The metrics display mounted above his station showed his efficiency rating dropping into the red zone. He'd designed these tracking systems himself, meant to optimize workflow and identify areas for improvement. Now he watched as his creation was used as a weapon of psychological torture. Problem with the scanner? A quiet voice startled him. The corporate plant, he'd learned the man's name was Michael Sullivan, had materialized beside him, ostensibly checking inventory numbers. Sometimes they work better if you hold them at an angle. The advice was delivered with a meaningful look that suggested more than scanner techniques. Before Alex could respond, a commotion erupted 2 aisles over. A worker had collapsed, her face grey with exhaustion. Alex started to move toward her, but Sullivan's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Don't," he whispered. "Not if you want to last here." They watched as the woman's co-workers helped her up, quickly dispersing before supervisors arrived. The incident wasn't logged, no medical attention was offered, and within minutes the conveyor belt resumed its relentless pace. During his shortened lunch break, 20 minutes instead of the mandated 30, Alex discovered another form of systematic abuse. The break room's vending machines, which by contract were supposed to offer meals at subsidized prices, charged triple the normal rate. Workers huddled around tables, sharing packets of ramen noodles and energy drinks, their conversations hushed and guarded. "First day's always the hardest," offered an older worker who introduced himself as Frank. His hands shook slightly as he opened his energy drink, his 5th of the day by his own admission. "You'll either quit or get used to it. Most quit." Frank's eyes darted nervously to the break room camera before adding in a whisper, "Some of us can't afford to quit." The afternoon brought new challenges. Alex was reassigned to the loading dock, where the real dangers of the warehouse's corner cutting became apparent. The forklift he was assigned had a faulty brake indicator, a critical safety violation. When he reported it to Reeves, the supervisor's response chilled him. "Write up for wasting time with unnecessary complaints. Equipment's fine. You want to keep this job, Parker? Shut up and work." The mounting violations he witnessed tore at his conscience. A pregnant worker denied bathroom breaks. A teenager operating dangerous equipment without proper training. An elderly man struggling with clearly unsafe lifting requirements. Each incident represented a failure of the systems he'd put in place to protect his workers. The breaking point came 2 hours before his shift ended. While moving boxes in the high-stack area, Alex noticed a young worker named Jason attempting to retrieve a package from an upper shelf without proper fall protection. Before he could say anything, Jason lost his balance. Pure instinct took over. Alex lunged forward, helping break the boy's fall. They crashed to the ground together, the impact sending shockwaves through Alex's already aching body. Reeves appeared instantly, his face twisted with fury. "What the hell is this? 2 workers down? Productivity bottlenecked?" He pointed at Jason. "Write up for unsafe practices." Then he turned to Alex. "And you, Parker, write up for unauthorized break in workflow." "He could have been seriously injured," Alex protested, his disguise slipping slightly in his anger. "The safety harnesses are locked in the supervisor's office. He couldn't access them." Reeves stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Another word, and you'll find out how many other warehouses in this area are hiring. Spoiler alert, none. That would take troublemakers like you." As Alex watched Jason shuffle back to his station, shoulders hunched in defeat, the full weight of his failure as a CEO crashed over him. He'd built this company with dreams of revolutionizing logistics while providing good jobs for hard-working people. Instead, he'd created a system that crushed the human spirit in the name of efficiency. The end of shift brought no relief. Workers trudged toward the time clocks, only to find half of them malfunctioning. The resulting delay meant many would clock out late. But Reeves announced that time cards would be adjusted to reflect scheduled end times, effectively stealing overtime pay from exhausted workers too afraid to complain. In the employee parking lot, Alex's hands shook so badly he dropped his car keys twice before managing to unlock the door. His body ached, but it was his spirit that felt truly broken. The warehouse he'd once showcased as a model of modern efficiency now revealed itself as a monument to human suffering, each impressive metric built on the broken backs of workers who had no choice but to endure. As he drove back to his motel, Alex's mind raced with the implications of everything he'd witnessed. The corruption wasn't just in the obvious violations, it was woven into the very fabric of daily operations, a systemic failure that couldn't be fixed with simple policy changes or personnel replacements. The question was no longer about what was wrong, but how deep the rot went, and whether he had the courage to tear it all down and start over. His phone buzzed with a message from Marie. Board meeting moved up. Hayes presenting efficiency report next week. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Something bigger was brewing, and Alex had a sinking feeling he'd only scratched the surface of the true corruption in his warehouse. But first, he had to survive another shift tomorrow, another day of witnessing the destruction of everything he'd meant his company to be. The warehouse nights held secrets that the day shift never witnessed. During his third night on the job, Alex discovered just how deep those secrets ran. A scheduling error had moved him to the graveyard shift, where the skeleton crew and dimmed lights created shadows perfect for hiding things management didn't want found. It started with a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. While organizing packages in the remote corner of Section D, voices drifted from behind the tall storage racks. He recognized Reeves immediately, but the other voice belonged to someone new, deeper, with an accent he couldn't quite place. "The insurance scam is working perfectly," the accented voice said. "Worker premiums go up, but the coverage mysteriously disappears. Beautiful system you have here." "Hayes's idea," Reeves replied proudly. "We collect the premiums, file the paperwork, then lose it in processing. By the time anyone realizes their claims aren't being paid, they're usually too desperate to keep their job to complain." Alex's hands clenched around the package he was holding. The worker health insurance program had been one of his first major initiatives as CEO, designed to provide comprehensive coverage for employees and their families. Now he understood why the Boston facility's healthcare costs were so low, despite having the highest reported worker injury rates in the company. The voices moved closer, forcing Alex to retreat deeper into the shadows. "What about the new initiative?" Reeves asked. "The one Hayes mentioned. Project Phoenix?" The accented voice chuckled. "Let's just say when it launches, this warehouse won't be the only one running under new management. Hayes has big plans, and the board is already eating out of his hand." Their footsteps faded, but Alex remained frozen in place, his mind racing. Project Phoenix, Hayes presenting to the board next week, suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. He needed to know more, but his wondering was interrupted by a subtle movement in his peripheral vision. Michael Sullivan, the corporate plant, emerged from behind. Another stack of boxes. Their eyes met in silent recognition. Both had heard the conversation. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Sullivan broke the silence. "You're not really from Office Max," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "And you're not really from corporate security," Alex countered, matching his tone. Sullivan's expression remained carefully neutral. "I'm from OSHA. We've been investigating this facility for months, but everyone we've sent in officially hits a wall of paperwork and excuses. So they sent me undercover." He studied Alex carefully. "The question is, who are you?" Before Alex could respond, the warehouse's main lights suddenly blazed to full brightness. The night shift supervisor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Surprise inspection. All workers report to their designated stations immediately." Sullivan melted away into the shadows with practiced ease, leaving Alex to hurry back to his station. But the interruption had served its purpose. Both men now knew they weren't alone in their investigation, even if neither fully trusted the other. The surprise inspection revealed another layer of deception. As corporate auditors walked the floor, Alex watched an elaborate dance unfold. Workers donned safety equipment that materialized from hidden storage areas. Properly maintained equipment appeared to replace damaged units. Even the temperature seemed to adjust, the ventilation system suddenly working at full capacity. But it was what happened in the office area that truly caught his attention. Through the window of Hayes's office, Alex could see Rachel Torres frantically shredding documents while another supervisor replaced files in the cabinet. The entire facility had been prepared for this kind of scrutiny, with systems in place to hide any evidence of wrongdoing. During his mandated break, timed conveniently during the inspection, Alex managed to get closer to the office area, pretending to use the nearby vending machine. Through the thin walls, he could hear Hayes speaking with the lead auditor. "As you can see, our safety records are impeccable," Hayes was saying. "We take worker welfare very seriously at TechLogix." "What about the complaints we've received?" the auditor asked. "Several anonymous reports about unsafe conditions and worker exploitation." Hayes's laugh was carefully calibrated to convey just the right mix of amusement and dismissal. "Disgruntled former employees? Nothing more. We have a very competitive environment here. Some people simply can't handle our standards of excellence." The auditor seemed satisfied, but Alex noticed something odd. The man's clipboard held a familiar logo, not TechLogix's current corporate design, but an older version that had been retired years ago. This wasn't a real corporate audit. It was theater, designed to create a paper trail of compliance. Later, that night, as the shift wound down, Alex observed a series of unusual deliveries. Unmarked trucks arrived at the loading dock, their contents unloaded with remarkable efficiency, and transported to a section of the warehouse he hadn't known existed. The workers handling these deliveries were different from the regular crew. More professional, more disciplined, and notably more careful about being seen. His opportunity to investigate came when Reeves assigned him to help with inventory in a nearby area. Between moving boxes, Alex managed to glimpse inside one of the unmarked crates. What he saw made his blood run cold. Sophisticated scanning equipment, the kind used to create counterfeit shipping labels and documentation. The pieces were starting to fit together. The missing insurance premiums, the fraudulent safety records, the mysterious Project Phoenix. This wasn't just about worker exploitation. It was an organized criminal enterprise operating under the cover of legitimate business. As his shift ended, Alex found a note slipped into his locker. "Midnight, loading bay 7. Come alone if you want the whole story." The handwriting matched the original letter that had brought him here, but now he had to wonder, was it a genuine offer of information or had his investigation been discovered? Either way, he knew he had to go. The corruption he'd uncovered was far worse than he'd imagined, and time was running out. Hayes's presentation to the board was less than a week away, and Project Phoenix, whatever it was, seemed poised to spread this cancer to other facilities. What Alex didn't know was that the next 12 hours would change everything, not just for his company, but for his understanding of human nature itself. The hours before midnight crawled by with excruciating slowness. Alex had returned to his motel room to rest, but sleep proved impossible. His mind kept returning to the faces he'd seen, the stories he'd heard, and most importantly, to one worker who had finally broken his silence during the afternoon shift. It had started in the break room, where Alex found himself sharing a table with Frank, the older worker who'd warned him on his first day. Frank's hands were shaking worse than usual as he tried to open his energy drink, and this time it wasn't just from caffeine overconsumption. "My daughter had her baby last night," Frank said quietly, showing Alex a photo on his cracked phone screen. My first grandchild. Haven't been able to visit them yet. Can't risk missing a shift. His voice cracked slightly. You know what the worst part is? I can't even put her on my insurance. Keep paying the premiums, but every claim gets denied. My daughter had to go on state assistance for the delivery. The proud grandfather's eyes welled with tears. He quickly wiped away. Been here 15 years. Started when this place was still family-owned before TechLogix bought it. Used to be different. Used to matter if you gave your life to this place. Frank glanced nervously at the break room camera before continuing in a whisper. 2 years ago, I hurt my back on the loading dock. Doctor said I needed surgery, but the claim paperwork kept getting lost. Reeves offered me a choice. Either keep quiet and keep working, or they'd find a reason to fire me. At my age, who else would hire me? The story hit Alex like a physical blow. He remembered signing the acquisition papers for this facility, remembered the promises made to maintain its family-oriented culture. Instead, he'd unknowingly sentenced loyal workers like Frank to years of systematic abuse. Later that afternoon, Alex witnessed the human cost of the warehouse's practices firsthand. A young worker named Maria, barely out of high school, was struggling to keep up with the punishing pace. Her scanner showed she was operating at 87% efficiency, below the mandatory 90% threshold Hayes had implemented. Please, she begged. Reeves, my little brother's sick. I just need to check my phone during breaks to make sure he's okay. That's why I'm a little slower. Reeves's response was coldly systematic. First warning for efficiency violation. Phones are for emergencies only, and your brother's sniffles don't qualify. Pick up the pace or pick up your final check. Alex watched Maria return to her station, wiping tears from her eyes while trying to scan packages faster. He'd created the efficiency tracking system to identify workers who might need additional training or support. Instead, it had become a tool for harassment and intimidation. The afternoon brought another revelation through Lisa, a veteran worker who'd been with TechLogix for over a decade. During a brief conversation by the water cooler, she revealed the personal toll of the warehouse's practices. Used to be a supervisor. Myself, she confided, her voice barely audible above the constant machinery noise. Got demoted when I refused to falsify safety reports. Hayes said I wasn't a team player. Now I'm back on the floor, making half what I used to, but at least I can sleep at night. Lisa's eyes darted around before she continued. Last month, a teenager got hurt on the forklift, the one with the faulty brakes. Hayes made us backdate the maintenance logs to show the equipment had been properly serviced. Kid's family can't afford a lawyer, so nothing came of it. But I remember when this company cared about more than just numbers. As the afternoon shift progressed, Alex found himself drawn into more conversations, each one revealing a new facet of the warehouse's toxic culture. A single mother working double shifts because her health insurance claims were repeatedly denied. A college student whose promised tuition assistance had mysteriously vanished from the HR systems. A veteran worker suffering from repetitive strain injury, but too afraid to report it. The most haunting conversation came from Jason, the young worker Alex had helped during the falling incident. He found the boy during the afternoon break, hiding in the far corner of the warehouse while nursing an obviously injured wrist. My dad worked here too, Jason said, attempting to wrap his wrist with a makeshift bandage. Had a heart attack right there by the loading dock 2 years ago. They said he was taking an unauthorized break when it happened. Denied my mum's insurance. A claim said he violated company policy by not reporting to the break room first. Jason's voice shook with suppressed emotion. Mum's still paying off the hospital bills. That's why I'm here, trying to help her make ends meet. They knew that when they hired me. Use it to make sure I don't cause trouble. Each story added another layer to Alex's understanding of the warehouse's transformation. What he'd built, as a legitimate business had been twisted into a machine that fed on desperation and fear. The efficiency metrics he'd designed to improve working conditions had become weapons of control. The benefits programs meant to support workers had been corrupted into tools of exploitation. As the shift ended and workers trudged toward the time clocks, Alex noticed something he'd missed before. Despite their exhaustion, despite the fear and frustration, there was a resilience in these people that transcended their circumstances. They looked out for each other in small ways, sharing food, covering briefly for bathroom breaks, quietly warning newcomers about which supervisors to avoid. The humanity that Hayes and his systems tried so hard to crush survived in these small acts of defiance and kindness. But it was a fragile thing, threatened by the constant pressure of impossible metrics and the ever-present fear of termination. As Alex prepared for his midnight meeting, these stories weighed heavily on his conscience. He'd built this company with dreams of innovation and efficiency, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of the human beings who made those dreams possible. The question now wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about whether he could restore the soul of his company before it was too late. Loading Bay 7 was the furthest from the security office, shrouded in shadows cast by malfunctioning overhead lights that, like so many things in the warehouse, had been reported, but never fixed. Alex arrived 15 minutes early, his nerves on edge as he waited in the darkness. The night shift's skeleton crew worked in the distance, their movements echoing through the vast space. A figure emerged from between the storage racks. Lisa, the demoted supervisor he'd spoken with earlier. She approached cautiously, constantly scanning their surroundings. When she reached him, she pulled a USB drive from her pocket. "I kept copies," she whispered, her hand trembling as she handed over the drive. "Every falsified report, every doctored safety log, every manipulated payroll record. But that's not the worst of it." She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Hayes has been building something bigger. They call it Project Phoenix, but it's more like Project Doomsday." Before she could continue, voices approached. Lisa melted back into the shadows, leaving Alex alone with the drive. He slipped it into his pocket just as Michael Sullivan, the OSHA investigator, stepped into view. "Quite the late-night meeting spot," Sullivan observed dryly. "I've been watching Hayes's operation for months, but I never had access to the financial records. Show me what you found." Alex hesitated, then made a decision. He needed allies, and Sullivan had already proven he was investigating the corruption. They found an empty office, and Alex used a computer that was still logged in under Torres's credentials, her habit of leaving her station unlocked. Another violation of company policy, finally proving useful. The files on the drive revealed a sophisticated network of financial fraud. Hayes had created a labyrinth of false accounts and manipulated records that went far beyond simple worker exploitation. The insurance premiums collected from workers were being diverted through a series of shell companies, eventually flowing into offshore accounts. "Look at this," Sullivan pointed to a spreadsheet. "They're not just stealing insurance premiums, they're double-billing corporate for equipment, maintenance while using substandard parts. The safety gear budget shows purchases from legitimate suppliers, but the actual equipment comes from unlicensed manufacturers." Alex's stomach churned as he dug deeper into the files. The warehouse's impressive profit margins were built on a foundation of fraud. Overtime hours were systematically erased from payroll records. Worker compensation claims were marked as processed in the corporate system, but never actually filed. Safety violations were documented and then buried under layers of falsified inspection reports. But the most disturbing discovery lay in a folder labeled Project Phoenix. Hayes had been quietly buying shares in TechLogix through various proxy accounts, accumulating a significant ownership stake. The presentation prepared for next week's board meeting wasn't just about efficiency metrics. It was the first step in a hostile takeover attempt. "He's been cooking the books for years," Sullivan explained, pointing to suspicious patterns in the financial reports, "making this warehouse look more profitable than any other facility in your network. The board sees the numbers, but they don't see the human cost." Hayes plans to use his success here as a model for taking over the entire company. The evidence was overwhelming. Hayes hadn't just corrupted this warehouse, he'd created a template for systematic worker exploitation that he planned to replicate across the entire TechLogix network. The insurance scam alone had netted millions, all while leaving workers vulnerable and unprotected. A noise in the hallway sent them scrambling to close the files. Through the office window, Alex watched Reeves patrol past, speaking intensely. Into his phone. Security breach in the system. Someone accessing restricted files. Hayes wants everyone questioned. They had overstayed their welcome. Sullivan quickly copied key files to his own drive before they erased their digital footprints. As they prepared to leave, one last document caught Alex's eye, a list of problem employees marked for termination once Project Phoenix launched. Frank's name was at the top, along with anyone else who had ever filed complaints or questioned Hayes's methods. "This goes beyond OSHA violations," Sullivan said grimly. "This is organized crime operating under corporate cover. But proving it won't be easy. Hayes has friends in high places and your workers are too scared to testify." Alex's mind raced as they made their way back to the warehouse floor. The midnight shift continued around them, workers moving like ghosts through the harsh industrial lighting. Each face he saw might belong to someone whose life savings had been stolen through the insurance scam, whose injury had been covered up, whose future hung in the balance of Hayes's ambitious plans. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Hayes hadn't just hijacked the warehouse's operations, he'd turned Alex's own systems and policies against their intended purpose. The efficiency metrics, the safety protocols, the benefits programs. All had been weaponized into tools of control and exploitation. As they parted ways, Sullivan handed Alex his card with a private number. "Whatever you're planning, do it fast. Hayes is making his move soon, and once he does, all this evidence might conveniently disappear." Back in his car, Alex examined the USB drive that now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He had the evidence he needed, but exposing the truth would mean acknowledging his own role in enabling this situation. His pursuit of efficiency and innovation had created the very systems Hayes had corrupted. The question was no longer just about stopping Hayes, it was about fundamentally changing the culture that had allowed someone like him to thrive. His phone buzzed with a message from Marie. "Board meeting moved up again, Hayes presenting tomorrow afternoon." The timeline had suddenly shortened dramatically. He had less than 24 hours to prevent his company from falling into the hands of a man who had turned worker exploitation into a science. But first, he had to survive the night shift. The computer access would have been logged somewhere, and Hayes's people would be looking for the security breach. Alex had thought he was investigating corruption in his warehouse. Instead, he'd stumbled into a criminal enterprise that threatened to consume his entire company. The graveyard shift stretched endlessly as Alex waited for his moment. After the discovery of the financial records, he knew he needed someone on the inside, someone who understood the warehouse's daily operations but hadn't been corrupted by Hayes's influence. His opportunity came just before dawn, in the form of Sarah Chen, the warehouse's veteran inventory specialist. He'd noticed her before, always slightly apart from the others, watching everything with quiet intensity. Unlike the supervisors who proudly displayed their TechLogix logos, Sarah wore a faded uniform that had seen better days. But there was something in her bearing that spoke of dignity maintained despite circumstances. The moment came during inventory. Reconciliation in Section E. Sarah was working alone, methodically checking manifests against physical stock. Alex deliberately miscounted a stack of packages, knowing it would draw her attention. "That's wrong," she said quietly, approaching his station. "You've counted the outer boxes, but not the inner units. It's a common mistake." There was no mockery in her voice, only a tired patience. "Been here long?" Alex asked, carefully maintaining his Jimmy Parker persona while letting a hint of his real curiosity show through. Sarah's eyes swept the area before she answered. 17 years. Started when this was still Anderson Logistics, before TechLogix bought us. Back when we had real safety protocols and decent benefits. She paused, studying him with unexpected intensity. "You're not what you seem, are you?" The question caught him off guard. Before he could respond, she continued in an even lower voice. "You watch everything too carefully. Ask questions that show you understand logistics better than any flaw. Workers should, and most importantly," she gave him a knowing look, "you still have hope in your eyes. That's rare around here." But their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other workers, but Sarah managed to slip him a note during the confusion. "Loading dock, 30 minutes. I'll show you what they don't want found." When Alex arrived at the loading dock, Sarah was waiting with a ring of keys she shouldn't have had access to. "Maintenance gave me copies years ago," she explained, leading him through a maze of storage areas. "Back when we still had proper maintenance staff, before Hayes replaced them with contractors who barely know which end of a wrench to hold." They stopped at a nondescript door marked Archives. Inside, Sarah revealed rows of filing cabinets containing what she called her insurance policy. 17 years of meticulous records documenting the warehouse's transformation from a family-owned business to Hayes's corrupt empire. "I started keeping records when things began changing," she explained, pulling out carefully organized files. "At first it was just noting small policy changes, reduced break times, increased quotas. Then it became something darker." She spread out documents on a dusty desk. "Look at these maintenance logs. The dates don't match the actual repairs. Equipment reported as serviced was still broken weeks later. Workers got hurt using machines that were supposedly safe." Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. "But it's not just about broken equipment. It's about broken people." Sarah shared her own story, how she'd worked her way up to assistant manager under the old ownership, only to be demoted when she questioned Hayes's methods. "They couldn't fire me outright. I knew too much about the old systems, the proper procedures, so they made my life difficult in other ways. Switched my shifts randomly, assigned me the heaviest workloads, denied my vacation requests." But Sarah had turned her punishment into an advantage. Working different shifts had allowed her to document violations across all time periods. Her various assignments had given her access to different areas of the warehouse. Most importantly, her reputation as a difficult employee had made others trust her with their stories. "Everyone here has a story," she said, pulling out more files. "Maria in shipping. They denied her maternity leave by claiming she hadn't worked enough hours, even though she was doing 60-hour weeks. Tom, in receiving, lost 3 fingers because they removed the safety guard on a conveyor belt. The official report says he was operating it incorrectly." As they talked, Alex began to understand why Sarah had survived so long in this environment. She wasn't just a witness to the corruption, she was a silent guardian, keeping records that might someday bring justice to her co-workers. "Why show me this now?" Alex asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Sarah's expression hardened. "Because Project Phoenix isn't just about taking over TechLogix. Hayes has been buying up small warehouses all over the state, implementing his efficiency methods. If he succeeds, what's happening here will become the industry standard. She pulled out one final document, a photograph that made Alex's blood run cold. It showed Hayes meeting with representatives from major logistics companies, including several of Techlogix's biggest competitors. "He's been selling his system," Sarah explained, "teaching other companies how to maximize profits by systematically exploiting workers while avoiding legal consequences. The insurance scam, the safety violations, the manipulated records, it's all being packaged as a revolutionary management approach." Alex realized he'd found more than just an ally. He'd found someone who understood the true stakes of this fight. Sarah hadn't just documented the corruption, she'd mapped its evolution and anticipated its future impact. "I've been waiting for someone like you," she admitted, "someone who might actually have the power to stop this. The workers here, they're not just employees, they're my family. I've watched Hayes destroy lives, break spirits, turn decent people against each other just to survive." As dawn approached, they carefully returned the documents to their hiding places. Sarah had one final warning: be careful. Hayes doesn't just fire people who threaten his system. He destroys them, makes sure they can never work in logistics again. And sometimes, she hesitated, sometimes they meet with accidents, real ones, not the kind that get covered up in his reports. Back in his motel room, Alex sat in darkness, Sarah's warnings echoing in his mind. The sun was rising, casting long shadows through the cheap curtains, but he couldn't rest. On his laptop screen, years of corporate reports stared back at him, reports he'd signed off on, presentations he'd praised, efficiency improvements he'd celebrated. Each document now felt like evidence of his own complicity. The phone on. His nightstand buzzed. Another message from Marie. Hayes, adding new items to board presentation, claims to have proof of systemic mismanagement by current leadership. Board members already asking questions. His hands trembled as he opened the USB drive containing Lisa's files, cross-referencing them with Sarah's documentation. The pattern was clear now, but it had been there all along. Every policy he'd created to protect workers had been systematically twisted. His efficiency metrics had become tools of oppression. His safety protocols had been turned into weapons of control. A knock at his door nearly stopped his heart. Through the peephole, he saw Michael Sullivan, the OSHA investigator, looking more haggard than usual. Alex let him in quickly, checking the parking lot for any signs of surveillance. "They found the computer breach," Sullivan reported without preamble. "Hayes is on a rampage. 2 workers have already been fired for suspected data theft. Lisa's gone into hiding. They were waiting at her house this morning." Alex's stomach lurched. His investigation had put people in danger, people who had already risked everything by helping him. He thought of Frank's grandchild, of Maria's sick brother, of all the families depending on these jobs despite the exploitation. "I've spent my life building this company," Alex said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every innovation, every policy, every system, it was all meant to make workers' lives better. Instead, I created the perfect machine for destroying them." Sullivan listened silently as Alex paced the small room. "You know what the worst part is? Hayes isn't just corrupting my systems, he's improving them, making them more efficient, at extracting profit from human suffering. He took everything I built and turned it into exactly what I was trying to prevent." His reflection caught his eye in the bathroom mirror, Jimmy Parker staring back at him, wearing the exhaustion of warehouse work like a badge. But beneath the disguise, he saw something worse. The face of a man who had hidden behind spreadsheets and quarterly reports while his dream turned into a nightmare. "I remember when I started Techlogix," Alex continued, more to himself than Sullivan. "My father worked in warehouses his whole life, came home with broken body and barely enough pay to keep food on the table. I promised myself I'd create something different, a company that proved you could be profitable while treating workers with dignity. He pulled up an old photo on his phone, the opening day of his first warehouse. He stood proudly with his initial team, all of them smiling, with genuine hope for the future. Where did I lose my way? When did I start trusting numbers more than people? Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. Look, I've investigated hundreds of companies. Most CEOs know exactly what they're doing. They choose profit over people every time. You're different. You just got too far removed from the ground level. But Alex barely heard him. His mind was racing through years of decisions, each one taking him further from his original vision. The IPO that brought shareholder pressure, the expansion that made personal oversight impossible, the delegation of power to people like Hayes who understood systems but not humanity. My father used to say that a warehouse is like a body, Alex mused, staring out at the brightening sky. The workers are its heart, pumping life through every department. Management is the brain, coordinating everything. But I forgot the most important part, the soul, the principles that keep it human. He opened Sarah's files again, reading through worker statements she'd collected over the years. Each story was a testament to resilience in the face of systematic abuse, people supporting each other despite policies designed to pit them against one another, small acts of kindness, surviving in an environment engineered to crush compassion. Hayes isn't just trying to take over my company, Alex realized aloud. He's trying to normalize this kind of exploitation, make it the industry standard, and he's using my own innovations to do it. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. He'd created systems so perfect, so efficient, that they could operate without any human conscience at all. Hayes hadn't corrupted TechLogix. He'd simply removed the last traces of humanity from its operations. Sullivan checked his phone, his expression grim. Hayes has called an emergency meeting for all supervisors this afternoon. Before the board presentation, whatever he's planning, it's happening soon. Alex stood, decision made. I can't just expose Hayes. I have to tear down everything he's built, including the parts that I created. The whole system needs to change. That kind of change comes at a price, Sullivan warned. Are you ready to sacrifice the efficiency, the profit margins, everything that made TechLogix attractive to investors? The question hung in the air as Alex considered the full implications. His company's stock would plummet, shareholders would revolt, his board might even try to remove him. But as he thought of Sarah's quiet dignity, of Frank's stolen retirement, of all the broken lives hidden behind impressive metrics, he knew there was only one choice. Sometimes, he said quietly, you have to break something completely to rebuild it right. The morning shift began with an atmosphere of palpable tension. Word of the computer breach had spread through the warehouse like wildfire, and Hayes's retaliation was swift and brutal. 3 more workers had been fired before the shift even started, their alleged connections to the data theft announced over the intercom as a warning to others. Alex arrived to find his locker had been searched. The contents scattered, his carefully constructed Jimmy Parker identity examined for any flaws. As he gathered his belongings, he noticed new security cameras had been installed overnight, their lenses focusing on areas that had previously been blind spots. They're watching everyone now, Sarah whispered as she passed his station, not breaking her stride. Hayes has hired private security. They're not wearing uniforms, but they're everywhere. Her voice trembled slightly. They visited my house this morning, asked my neighbors about my routine. The implied threat was clear. Hayes wasn't just looking for data thieves, he was sending a message to anyone who might think of exposing his operation. Alex noticed unfamiliar men positioned. Throughout the warehouse, their casual poses belied by their alert eyes and communication earpieces. Reeves seemed to take particular pleasure in the heightened atmosphere of fear. "Random security checks today," he announced during the morning briefing. "Anyone refusing to comply will be considered in violation of their employment agreement." His eyes lingered on Alex. "We take corporate espionage very seriously at Techlogics." The morning progressed with agonizing slowness. Alex watched as workers were pulled aside for interviews with security, returning shaken and silent. Even Frank, usually steady despite his struggles, dropped several packages after his interrogation, his hands shaking too badly to maintain his grip. "They know everything about us," Frank muttered during a brief moment alone. "My grandchild's hospital, my daughter's workplace, even my wife's physical therapy appointments. It wasn't just questions, it was warnings." Around midday, Alex witnessed something that made his blood run cold. One of Hayes's new security men cornered Maria near the break room, speaking too quietly to hear. But Maria's face told the story. Whatever threat he delivered left her pale and trembling. When Alex tried to approach her later, she quickly walked away, refusing to make eye contact. The situation escalated when Sullivan, maintaining his cover, was summoned to Hayes's office. Through the glass walls, Alex watched their interaction. Hayes's face remained pleasant, but his body language screamed predator. When Sullivan returned to the floor, his expression was grim. "They're closing the net," Sullivan whispered, during a carefully orchestrated collision near the shipping area. "Hayes knows someone's investigating. He's not just looking for leaked data anymore. He's hunting for anyone who might threaten Project Phoenix." The afternoon brought a new level of intimidation. Safety equipment began disappearing from stations, forcing workers to either stop work and report the violation, marking themselves as troublemakers, or continue working under increasingly dangerous conditions. It was a calculated move, designed to identify anyone who still had the courage to speak up. Alex observed as Jason, the young worker he'd helped before, reached for a safety harness that should have been at his station. Finding it missing, the boy glanced nervously at Reeves before continuing to work on the high shelves without protection. The message was clear. Safety was now a privilege, not a right. The breaking point came during the afternoon shift change. Lisa, who had gone into hiding after the computer breach, was brought into the warehouse by Hayes's security team. Her face showed no signs of physical abuse, but her eyes held a terror that spoke volumes. She was paraded past every workstation, a living warning of what happened to those who defied the system. "Consider this a learning opportunity," Hayes announced over the intercom. "Lisa here thought she could steal company data. Thanks to our efficient security team, she's learned the error of her ways. Haven't you, Lisa?" Lisa's voice shook as she responded. I made a mistake. I'm grateful for the chance to correct it." The prepared statement sounded hollow, mechanical, forced. Alex watched in mounting horror as Hayes's true message became clear. This wasn't just about protecting data or preventing leaks. It was a demonstration of power, showing every worker that resistance was futile, that Hayes could reach anyone, anywhere. Sarah managed to pass him a note during the chaos. "They found my archive room. Everything's gone. Hayes is erasing evidence before the board meeting. Be careful. You're next on their list." The warning proved prophetic. As Alex returned to his station, he noticed more of Hayes's security men converging on his area. Their movements were casual but purposeful, slowly cutting off potential escape routes. Through the office windows, he could see Reeves reviewing security footage, specifically focusing on Alex's movements over the past few days. His phone vibrated, a message from Marie. Hayes's presentation moved up to 3 p.m., board members arriving. Early for private meeting. Something big is happening. The walls were closing in. Hayes was systematically eliminating threats while strengthening his position with the board. And now, His security team was closing in on Alex's position. Their coordinated movements suggesting they'd finally identified him as a primary threat. Looking around the warehouse floor, Alex saw the faces of workers who had trusted him with their stories. Frank, Maria, Jason, Sarah. Each of them watched the security team's movements with quiet desperation, knowing they were powerless to help without risking their own safety. The time for gathering evidence was over. Hayes had forced his hand. Whatever Alex was going to do, he had to do it now, before Hayes's presentation to the board, before more workers suffered for helping him expose the truth. But first, he had to survive the next hour. With Hayes's private security closing in and every exit looking increasingly hostile. With Hayes's security team closing in, Alex needed a diversion. It came unexpectedly from Frank, who chose that moment to have what appeared to be a stress-induced collapse. As security personnel rushed to handle the situation, Alex slipped away, through the chaos, making his way toward the one place he hadn't yet investigated, the warehouse's supposedly defunct basement level. Sarah had mentioned it in passing, a sub-level that had been marked as condemned shortly after Hayes took over. According to official records, it was structurally unsound and used only for storage of outdated equipment. But Sarah had noticed an odd pattern. Every night, just after midnight, the service elevator would descend to that level, and strange noises would echo through the floor. Using his knowledge of the building's original design, Alex located a maintenance stairwell that wasn't on the current floor plans. The door was locked, but the keycard he'd copied from Torres's desk during their first meeting worked. As he descended into the darkness, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air held a metallic tang that didn't match the official story of abandoned storage. The basement level was anything but condemned. Hidden behind stacks of broken equipment and obsolete machinery, a sophisticated operation hummed with activity. Multiple computer stations displayed real-time data feeds from every major logistics company in the country. Wall monitors tracked shipment routes, worker productivity rates, and what appeared to be automated trading algorithms. Impressive, isn't it? The voice froze Alex in place. Hayes stepped out from behind a server bank, flanked by 2 security guards. "I wondered how long it would take you to find your way down here, Mr. Morrison." The use of his real name sent a chill down Alex's spine. Hayes smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. "Did you really think we wouldn't run facial recognition on every new hire, especially after our security systems flagged unauthorized access to sensitive areas?" "What is all this?" Alex asked, playing for time while scanning for possible exits. "This," Hayes gestured expansively, "this is the future of logistics. Project Phoenix isn't just about taking over TechLogix, it's about revolutionizing the entire industry." He moved to one of the computer stations, pulling up detailed analytics. Every major company has the same weakness. They think workers are human beings who need rights, breaks, fair treatment. I've proven they're just variables in an equation. The screens displayed an intricate web of data flows. Hayes had created an artificial intelligence system that tracked and analyzed every aspect of warehouse operations across multiple companies. It wasn't just about monitoring workers, it was about optimizing human exploitation down to the smallest detail. "Your efficiency algorithms were brilliant," Hayes continued, "but they were held back by your antiquated moral concerns. I simply removed those limitations. The results speak for themselves." He brought up a comparison chart showing productivity rates. "My methods generate 40% more profit than any other facility in the country." Alex moved carefully around the room, absorbing details. The insurance scam was just the tip of the iceberg. Hayes had created a complete system for maximizing profit through systematic worker exploitation. Every aspect was carefully calculated. The exact amount of safety violations that wouldn't attract regulatory attention, the optimal level of fear. needed to prevent unionization, the precise balance of threats and minimal benefits to keep workers dependent. The board meeting today isn't just a presentation, Hayes revealed, his voice filled with triumph. It's a demonstration. While you've been playing detective, I've been implementing my system in warehouses across the country. Today, I show the board how their entire network could operate under my methods. The implications were staggering. Hayes hadn't just corrupted one warehouse, he'd created a blueprint for institutionalized exploitation. The computer systems tracked everything, which workers were most vulnerable to threats, which ones might become whistleblowers, which ones could be pushed hardest before breaking. Your father was weak, Hayes continued, catching Alex off guard. I researched your background thoroughly, a warehouse worker who dreamed of better conditions. That's why you built all those worker protections into TechLogic's systems. But you failed to understand a fundamental truth. Workers aren't assets to be protected, they're resources to be consumed. Alex's hand closed around a flash drive in his pocket as he moved closer to a central computer terminal. If he could just download the evidence of Hayes's broader operation. Don't bother, Hayes said, noting the movement. The system is completely isolated. Any unauthorized access triggers an immediate data purge. Why do you think I let you find your way down here? In 30 minutes, I present to the board. In 40 minutes, all of this evidence disappears. And you? He smiled coldly. Unfortunately, there's going to be a tragic accident involving our condemned basement level. The security guards moved closer, their intentions clear. But Hayes wasn't finished. The best part? I used your own innovations to build this. Your efficiency metrics, your tracking systems, your performance algorithms. I just repurposed them to their true potential. You created the perfect machine for worker exploitation, Mr. Morrison. I simply removed the safety switches. The screens surrounding them told the story in cold data. Injury rates carefully maintained just below reportable levels. Worker turnover optimized for maximum profit. Compensation calculated to keep people dependent without providing real security. It was a masterpiece of systematic oppression, designed to be replicated across the entire industry. Your board will love it, Hayes continued. All they'll see are the profit margins. By this time tomorrow, your precious company will be implementing my methods nationwide, and you? He nodded to his guards. You'll be another workplace accident statistic. Poetic, don't you think? Alex had seen enough. The operation wasn't just criminal. It was a blueprint for industrialized human suffering. Hayes hadn't just corrupted TechLogic's systems, he'd perfected them into weapons against the very people they were meant to protect. The question now wasn't just about saving his company, it was about preventing this model of exploitation from becoming the industry standard. But first, he had to survive the next few minutes, trapped in a basement with 2 armed guards and a man who had turned worker exploitation into a science. The board meeting was approaching, and with it, the potential transformation of his life's work into something monstrous. Time was running out, and Hayes held all the cards, or so he thought. The basement's fluorescent lights flickered ominously as Hayes's security guards moved to block the exits. But it was the figure emerging from the shadows that made Alex's heart truly sink. David Sullivan, his CFO of 15 years, the man he'd trusted with his company's financial future. I have to admit, Sullivan said, straightening his designer tie, watching you play warehouse worker was quite entertaining. Remember all those board meetings where you insisted on better worker conditions? If you'd only listened to my suggestions about streamlining operations, none of this would have been necessary. The pieces clicked into place. The questionable financial reports, the delayed worker compensation claims, the mysterious budget discrepancies. Sullivan had been laying the groundwork for Hayes's takeover for years. Every time Alex had pushed for worker protections, Sullivan had found ways to redirect the funds, creating a paper trail that made Alex look incompetent. "How long?" Alex asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "How long have you been working against everything we built?" Sullivan chuckled, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Against? Oh, Alex, I've been working to perfect what you built. Your systems were brilliant, but your morality was holding us back. Hayes showed me how to unlock their true potential." As if to emphasize the point, Hayes pulled up more data on the central screen. "Show him, David. Show him what real efficiency looks like." Sullivan moved to the computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Look at these numbers, Alex. Worker productivity up 60% across all metrics. Operating costs down 45%. Insurance overhead practically eliminated. We've turned your inefficient, worker-friendly warehouse into a profit-generating machine." The betrayal cut deep. Sullivan had been there from the beginning, had helped Alex draft the company's original mission statement about ethical worker treatment. They'd shared holidays, celebrated each other's children's graduations, built tech logics together, or so Alex had thought. "The board meeting today isn't just about Hayes's presentation," Sullivan continued, his corporate mask finally dropping to reveal the calculating predator beneath. "It's about exposing your failures as CEO. Every policy you implemented, every worker protection you insisted on, we've documented how they've hurt the company's bottom line." Hayes picked up the thread, clearly enjoying Alex's distress. "While you've been playing detective down here, Sullivan has been upstairs presenting evidence to early arriving board members, showing them how your obsession with worker welfare has cost shareholders millions. By the time I present my efficiency model, they'll be begging to implement it company-wide." A notification popped up on one of the screens. More board members arriving early for Hayes's presentation. Sullivan checked his watch, right on schedule. They're particularly interested in seeing the real-time analytics of worker productivity under our new system. "New system?" Alex's voice dripped with contempt. "You mean your systematic exploitation of desperate people? The illegal insurance scams, the safety violations? Insurance fraud, safety violations." Sullivan laughed. "Such small thinking, Alex. That was just the testing phase. Watch this." He typed a command, and the screens filled with data from multiple warehouses across the country. "We've been implementing Hayes's methods in every facility we could access, creating a network of optimized warehouses, all running on his AI system." The scale of the betrayal was staggering. While Alex had been focused on his own warehouse, Hayes and Sullivan had been spreading their corrupt model throughout the industry. Every efficiency metric Alex had developed had been twisted into a tool for exploitation. Every innovation perverted into a weapon against workers. "Your father would be so disappointed," Sullivan mocked, twisting the knife. "All those stories you told the board about learning the value of honest work from him. While you were reminiscing about worker dignity, Hayes and I were building the future of logistics." Alex's hands clenched into fists as Sullivan continued. "It was almost too easy. Every time you pushed for better conditions, I just had to show the board the cost analysis. Every worker protection you demanded became evidence of your mismanagement. Even your little undercover mission played into our hands. What kind of CEO abandons his post to play dress-up with warehouse workers?" Hayes moved to the main computer terminal, beginning to upload his presentation for the board. "In 20 minutes, I demonstrate how my system can be implemented across all TechLogic's facilities. In 30 minutes, the board votes to remove you for gross mismanagement. By end of day, your precious worker protections will be dismantled nationwide." "And the workers?" Alex asked, already knowing the answer. "What happens to them?" "They'll adapt or be replaced," Sullivan said dismissively. "There's always someone desperate enough to accept our terms. That's the beauty of the system. It's self-sustaining. The worse we make conditions, the more desperate people become, the more they'll accept just to survive. The guards' radios crackled. The board meeting was being moved up again. Hayes smiled triumphantly. Perfect timing. Sullivan, shall we head upstairs? Our security team can handle the cleanup here. His meaning was clear. Alex wouldn't be leaving the basement alive. As Hayes and Sullivan moved toward the elevator, Alex realized the full magnitude of what he was facing. This wasn't just about saving one warehouse or exposing one corrupt manager. His entire company, his life's work, was about to be transformed into a blueprint for industrialized worker exploitation. And the man he'd trusted most had been the architect of its destruction. As Hayes and Sullivan disappeared into the elevator, leaving Alex with the two guards, a sudden commotion erupted from above. The guards' radios crackled with urgent voices, something about a fire alarm in the main warehouse. One guard stepped away to respond, creating the opening Alex needed. In the moment of distraction, Michael Sullivan, the real OSHA investigator, emerged from behind a server bank where he'd been hidden, quickly subduing the remaining guard. "Sorry I'm late," he said, securing the guard's weapons. "Had to coordinate with Sarah to create that distraction upstairs." Alex moved quickly to the computer terminals. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they realize the fire alarm is false. Help me download everything." His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the systems using Sullivan's stolen credentials. The AI system's security was sophisticated, but Hayes had made one critical mistake. He'd built it using TechLogic's original code architecture, which Alex had written himself. He found the backdoor access points he'd installed years ago, still functional despite Hayes's modifications. "Look at this," Sullivan said, pulling up personnel files. "They've been profiling workers across multiple facilities, identifying which ones are most vulnerable to exploitation. Medical histories, family situations, financial records. They've built a database of human desperation." Alex downloaded everything: the worker exploitation algorithms, the falsified safety reports, the financial fraud evidence. Most damning of all was Hayes's presentation for the board, a detailed plan to implement his system across the entire industry, complete with projected profits from systematic worker abuse. "This goes beyond OSHA violations," Sullivan muttered, examining the data. "They've created a template for modern slavery, disguised as corporate efficiency." A noise from the stairwell prompted them to move faster. Alex found the master control system for Hayes's AI, the brain that coordinated the exploitation across multiple facilities. With a few keystrokes, he initiated a complete system backup, copying every file, every algorithm, every piece of evidence. "Got it," he said, pocketing the flash drive. But Hayes still has his presentation upstairs. Without proof that he and David are working together, the board might still believe them over me. Sullivan pointed to a locked cabinet in the corner. "What about that? The guards were very careful not to let me near it during my tour earlier." The cabinet yielded to Alex's stolen key card, revealing stacks of documents, original contracts, signed agreements, and most importantly, communications between Hayes and David Sullivan dating back 3 years. The paper trail showed how they had systematically undermined Alex's worker protection policies while building their shadow operation. "We need to move," Sullivan urged, hearing footsteps above. "Sarah can only keep them distracted for so long." But Alex wasn't finished. He found one last file, hidden behind the others, Project Phoenix's true implementation timeline. It wasn't just about TechLogic's. Hayes and Sullivan had already begun implementing their system in smaller warehouses across the country, creating a network of worker exploitation that could quickly expand once they gained control of TechLogic's Resources. The elevator hummed to life. Someone was coming down. Alex quickly photographed the remaining documents with his phone, while Sullivan dragged the unconscious guard out of sight. They barely made it to the stairwell before the elevator doors opened, revealing more of Hayes' security team. The board. Meeting starts in 10 minutes, Sullivan whispered as they climbed the stairs. Hayes will have the room locked down. How are you going to get in? Alex smiled grimly. I'm still CEO for the next 10 minutes. And I had Marie change all the security codes this morning, just in case. They emerged into chaos. The fire alarm had done its job, dispersing workers and security throughout the facility. Through the confusion, Alex spotted Sarah directing people toward emergency exits, carefully positioning trusted workers to block Hayes' security from certain areas. Get that evidence to your OSHA team, Alex told Sullivan. I'll handle Hayes and the board. They'll try to stop you, Sullivan warned. Hayes' security team has orders to use whatever force necessary. Then it's a good thing we have evidence of that too, Alex replied, patting the flash drive. Everything they've done, every order they've given, it's all in their own system. Hayes was so proud of his perfect operation that he documented everything. The sound of approaching security sent Sullivan running one way while Alex moved toward the administrative offices. He had the evidence to expose Hayes' operation, but getting to the board meeting wouldn't be easy. Hayes' security teams were converging on the upper floor, and Alex was still dressed as Jimmy Parker, the warehouse worker. But he had one advantage they didn't expect: intimate knowledge of the building he'd designed. As security guards rushed past, Alex slipped into a maintenance tunnel, one of several he'd insisted on including in the original construction. These passages, meant for accessing utilities, would lead him directly to the boardroom. In his pocket, the flash drive felt heavy with the weight of thousands of workers' futures. He had 10 minutes to reach the boardroom, expose Hayes and Sullivan's operation, and save not just his company, but potentially the entire industry from becoming a machine of systematic exploitation. Behind him, angry voices echoed through the corridors. Hayes' security had discovered their unconscious colleague in the basement. Ahead, he could hear David Sullivan's voice through the walls, already beginning his presentation to the board. The next few minutes would determine whether his life's work would be saved or perverted into something monstrous. Alex checked his phone one last time. A message from Marie confirmed she'd received backup copies of all the evidence. No matter what happened in the next few minutes, Hayes' operation would be exposed. The only question was whether TechLogix could be saved. In the process, moving through the maintenance tunnel, Alex's mind raced with everything that had led to this moment. But it was Frank's voice that stopped him, coming through a ventilation grate, speaking to what sounded like a group of workers gathered in a storage room below. "We can't let them do this," Frank was saying, his usually trembling voice now firm with conviction. "Mr. Parker, or Mr. Morrison, whatever his real name is, he tried to help us. Now it's our turn to help him." Alex paused, listening as Sarah's voice joined the discussion. "Hayes' security has the administrative floor locked down. They're not letting anyone near the boardroom, but we know this warehouse better than they do. We've worked every corner, every shift." Through gaps in the grating, Alex could see about 20 workers gathered below. He recognized them all, the ones who had shared their stories with him, who had suffered under Hayes' regime, who had nothing left to lose. "The fire alarm bought us some time," Maria added, "but Hayes' team is doing a sweep of the building. They're looking for Mr. Morrison, and they're not being gentle about it." Lisa, who had earlier been paraded around as an example, stepped forward. Her face still showed fear, but her voice was steady. "They threatened my family to make me read. That statement said they'd make sure my kids never saw me again, but I'm done being afraid. I have copies of every falsified safety report I was forced to sign. One by one, workers began sharing what they had documented over the years. Jason had photographed the tampered equipment that caused his father's death. Maria had kept records of every denied break request and forced overtime shift. Even the maintenance staff had preserved evidence of Hayes's orders to disable safety systems. But how do we get the evidence to the board? Someone asked. Hayes has his security blocking every entrance. Sarah smiled, pulling out a set of blueprints. Mr. Morrison wasn't the only one studying this building's layout. See these maintenance tunnels? They connect every floor. And these ventilation shafts, big enough for someone small to crawl through. Alex watched in amazement as the workers began organizing themselves with the same efficiency they'd learned on the warehouse floor. But this time, using it to fight back against the system that had oppressed them. Security's watching the elevators and stairs, Frank explained, pointing to the blueprints. But they don't know about the old pneumatic delivery system from when this was a manufacturing plant. The tubes are still in the walls. I can get through the vents, Jason volunteered. Used to do urban exploration before taking this job. The shaft above receiving leads straight to the administrative level. Maria pulled out her phone. I've got every threatening text Hayes and Reeves ever sent me. Been forwarding them to my home email, just in case. Alex realized he wasn't just witnessing an alliance forming, he was seeing years of quiet resistance coming together. Every worker who had suffered under Hayes's system had kept their own small piece of evidence, waiting for a chance to expose the truth. They're not just looking for Mr. Morrison, Sarah warned. They're hunting for anyone who might testify against Hayes. We need to protect our people. Already on it, said a quiet voice. Alex recognized Tom from maintenance. Been reprogramming the security doors. When I hit this switch, every electronic lock in the building goes into emergency override. Hayes's teams won't be able to trap anyone. The workers continued coordinating, each contributing their knowledge of the warehouse's hidden spaces and unofficial pathways. They had spent years learning how to navigate around Hayes's surveillance, how to communicate without being overheard, how to survive in a system designed to break them. What about the board members? Lisa asked. Even with evidence, will they believe us over Hayes and Sullivan? They'll believe this, said a new voice. Michael Sullivan emerged from the shadows, holding up his OSHA badge. I've got federal agents surrounding the building. Once we have proof of Hayes's operation, we can shut it down legally. The workers' expressions changed from surprise to determination. They weren't just fighting for their jobs anymore. They were fighting to prevent Hayes's system from spreading to other warehouses, other companies, other workers who would suffer the same exploitation. 10 minutes until Hayes's presentation, Sarah announced, checking her watch. Everyone know their positions? Alex watched as the workers dispersed with purpose, each heading to their assigned locations. They moved with the coordinated efficiency that Hayes had drilled into them, but now that precision would be used against him. Through another grate, Alex could see Frank gathering older workers who knew the building's original layout. Maria was organizing younger workers into relay teams, ready to move evidence through the building's hidden passages. Lisa was coordinating with Sullivan, mapping out which security teams needed to be distracted or contained. Most impressively, Sarah had transformed the warehouse's unofficial communication network, the subtle signs and warnings workers used to protect each other, from Hayes's attention into an organized resistance. Hand signals, maintenance calls, even the rhythm of the conveyor belts would now serve to coordinate their efforts. Alex realized he wasn't just rushing to save his company, he was part of something larger. The workers weren't just helping him. They were reclaiming their dignity, their workplace, their right to be treated as human beings rather than disposable resources. His phone buzzed with a message from Marie. Board members all present. Hayes and Sullivan preparing to start. Security teams in position on administrative level. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of TechLogix, but the future of thousands of workers across the country. Hayes had built his empire on the assumption that workers could be controlled through fear and desperation. He was about to learn that human dignity, once awakened, was a force no algorithm could contain. The administrative floor of TechLogix's Boston warehouse facility had been transformed into a fortress. Hayes' security teams patrolled every corridor, their earpieces crackling with constant updates. Through the maintenance tunnel's vents, Alex could see board members being escorted into the conference room, each one passing through multiple security checkpoints. "Everything's in position." Sarah's voice came through the small radio she'd slipped him earlier. "Jason's in the ventilation system above the boardroom. Maria and her team have the evidence packets ready to move. Tom's got control of the building's systems." Alex checked his watch. 5 minutes until Hayes' presentation. Through the grating, he could see David Sullivan arranging documents. At the head of the conference table, his confident smile never wavering. Hayes stood nearby, talking quietly with board members who had arrived early. "Our security teams are being kept busy," Michael Sullivan reported through the radio. "Your workers are running them in circles with false alarms and maintenance calls." But Hayes is getting suspicious. He's ordered a complete lockdown of the administrative level. The trap was set, but timing would be crucial. Alex had spent his career building systems and protocols, and now everything depended on dismantling them at precisely the right moment. He thought of his father's words about warehouse work. Every movement has to flow into the next. One mistake in the sequence, and the whole operation falls apart. Board members are asking about the worker. Unrest, Marie's voice joined the radio conversation. She was monitoring the situation from her position as assistant to the board. Hayes is telling them it's just disgruntled employees resistant to modernization. He's painting himself as a progressive force being held back by outdated worker protection policies. Through another vent, Alex watched as Reeves hurried into the boardroom, whispering something to Hayes. Hayes' expression darkened momentarily before he smoothed it away, but the message was clear. Something wasn't going according to his plan. "They're starting to realize their security systems aren't as locked down as they thought," Tom reported. "I've got control of every camera feed, every door lock, every electronic system in the building, just waiting for your signal." Alex pulled up the building schematics on his phone, reviewing the sequence one final time. Everything had to happen in perfect order. Tom would trigger the security override. Maria's teams would move the evidence through the building's hidden pathways. Jason would relay it through the ventilation system to the boardroom, and Sarah's people would keep Hayes' security distracted long enough for Alex to make his move. "Lisa's ready with the OSHA documentation," Michael Sullivan added. "She's got enough evidence of safety violations to shut down the facility immediately. Hayes won't be able to dismiss it as disgruntled workers this time." Through the vent, Alex could see Hayes preparing to begin his presentation. The board members settled into their seats, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. David Sullivan stood at Hayes' side, ready to support his claims of mismanagement and inefficiency. "Now they're claiming the fire alarm was worker sabotage," Marie reported. "Hayes is using it to argue for stricter controls and surveillance. Some board members are actually nodding in agreement." The moment had come. Alex keyed his radio. "Tom, start the sequence. Maria, move your teams into position. Jason, stand by for the evidence relay. Sarah, keep those security teams occupied. Sullivan, get your OSHA team ready to move." One by one, acknowledgements came back through the radio. The warehouse that Hayes had turned into a machine of exploitation was about to become the instrument of his downfall. Every camera, every lock, every system he had used to control workers would now be turned against him. 10 seconds, Tom announced. Security override initiating now. The administrative floor plunged into emergency lighting as the building's systems responded to Tom's commands. Hayes's security teams suddenly found their access cards useless as door locks reset to emergency protocols. Surveillance cameras switched to backup systems, their feeds now controlled by Tom rather than Hayes's security office. Through the confusion, Alex could see Hayes maintaining his composure, using the disruption to strengthen his argument for increased control. But there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He was starting to realize that something was wrong. Evidence packets moving, Maria reported. Her teams were using the chaos to transfer documented proof of Hayes's crimes through the building's hidden pathways, staying ahead of the confused security teams. OSHA teams in position, Sullivan confirmed. We've got every exit covered. Hayes's private security won't be able to remove any evidence or threaten any workers. Sarah's voice came through next. Security teams are scattered throughout the building, chasing maintenance alerts and false alarms. They're completely off balance. Alex watched through the vent as Hayes began his presentation, his voice steady despite the emergency lighting. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, what you're witnessing is exactly why TechLogix needs new leadership. This kind of worker disruption, this resistance to progress, it's the direct result of policies that prioritize outdated concepts of worker welfare over operational efficiency. The perfect moment was approaching. Every piece was in place, every worker positioned exactly where they needed to be. Hayes had spent years building a system that treated human beings as disposable resources. He was about to learn that those same humans had been quietly building something of their own, a network of resistance that would bring his empire crashing down. All teams ready, Sarah confirmed. Waiting for your signal, Mr. Morrison. Alex took a deep breath, remembering every worker's story, every violation he'd witnessed, every betrayal that had brought them to this moment. Hayes had turned his warehouse into a weapon against workers. Now those same workers would help him reclaim it. Begin final sequence, he ordered. Let's show Hayes what real efficiency looks like. Hayes was midway through his presentation when the boardroom doors burst open. The emergency lighting cast dramatic shadows as Alex strode in, still wearing Jimmy Parker's warehouse uniform, but carrying himself with unmistakable authority. Behind him, Sarah and Frank led a group of workers into the room, while Michael Sullivan entered with his OSHA team from another door. I apologize for interrupting, Alex announced, his voice carrying the weight of every revelation he'd uncovered. But I believe the board needs to see the complete picture before making any decisions about TechLogix's future. Hayes recovered. Quickly, his smile never wavering. Ah, Mr. Morrison, I was wondering when you'd make your theatrical entrance, though I must say the costume is a bit melodramatic even for you. Not a costume, Marcus, Alex replied, moving to the head of the table. Just the uniform of the people you've been systematically exploiting, the people whose lives you've turned into data points in your efficiency algorithms. And David Sullivan stepped forward, maintaining his corporate facade. Alex, you're clearly stressed, taking off without notice, playing dress-up in the warehouse. The board has already seen the evidence of your increasingly erratic behavior. Evidence? Alex pressed a button on his phone, and the room's presentation screen came to life. Let's talk about evidence. Tom, show them what's really happening in Hayes's perfect system. The screen filled with security footage from the warehouse floor. Workers being denied breaks, safety violations, injured employees forced to continue working. This is the reality of Hayes's efficiency metrics, Alex continued. But it gets worse. Sarah stepped forward, her quiet dignity commanding attention. For 3 years, I've documented every violation, every incident, every piece of evidence of Mr. Hayes's true operation. She began distributing files to the board members. These aren't just policy violations. This is systematic worker exploitation designed to maximize profit through human suffering. The board members began examining the documents, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern. Hayes's smile finally cracked. These are obviously fabricated, disgruntled workers trying to protect their cushy benefits. Cushy benefits? Frank interrupted, his voice strong despite his trembling hands. You mean the insurance premiums you stole? The safety equipment you never provided? The compensation claims you buried? He turned to the board. My granddaughter was born last week. I couldn't be there because Hayes's system denies time off, requests while pocketing our benefit payments. Hayes moved to call security, but Michael Sullivan stepped forward, displaying his OSHA credentials. Your security teams are currently being detained by federal agents. We've been building a case against your operation for months, but I don't think even we understood the full scope until now. Alex connected his flash drive to the presentation system. This is Hayes's AI system, the brain behind his perfect warehouse. It doesn't just track productivity, it calculates exactly how much human suffering can be extracted before workers break. How many safety violations can be hidden before attracting regulatory attention? How much fear is needed to prevent unionization? The screens filled with data, charts showing the optimization of worker exploitation, algorithms calculating the cost-benefit ratio of ignoring safety regulations, profiles, identifying which workers were most vulnerable to threats and coercion. And here, Alex continued, pulling up more files, is proof that Hayes and David Sullivan have been working together for years to undermine every worker protection I implemented. They didn't just corrupt one warehouse, they created a template. For industrialized exploitation, they planned to sell to the entire industry. David Sullivan's professional mask finally cracked. The numbers don't lie, Alex. Your precious worker protections were costing us millions. Hayes showed us how to unlock the true potential of your systems. The numbers don't lie. Alex turned to Lisa, who stepped forward with her own documentation. Show them the real numbers, Lisa. Show them what Hayes's system actually costs. In human lives, in destroyed families, in shattered communities. Lisa's voice shook, but remained clear as she detailed the human cost of Hayes's efficiency metrics. The board members listened in growing horror as she described the systematic destruction of worker safety, dignity, and basic human rights. But wait, Hayes interrupted, desperately trying to regain control. Your precious workers aren't as innocent as they seem. Show them the productivity reports. Show them how efficient my system is. Efficient? Jason stepped forward, holding up a picture of his father. My dad died on your efficient warehouse floor because you disabled safety equipment to save costs. The official report says he violated procedures, but we all know the truth. One by one, workers began sharing their stories. Stories of injuries ignored, of threats received, of lives destroyed by Hayes's ruthless pursuit of profit. Each testimony was backed by documentation, by video evidence, by irrefutable proof of systematic abuse. The boardroom fell silent as the full impact of the revelations sank in. Hayes's perfect system, his revolutionary approach to warehouse management, was revealed for what it truly was, a sophisticated machine for turning human suffering into corporate profit. There's more, Alex announced, triggering another sequence of displays. Project Phoenix isn't just about tech logics. Hayes has been implementing his system in warehouses across the country, creating a network of worker exploitation that he planned to expand once he gained control of our company. The evidence was overwhelming. Hayes's empire of efficiency was built on a foundation of human misery, documented in his own meticulous records. The board members exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism replaced by growing outrage. Hayes made one final attempt to regain control. You're destroying everything we built. The shareholders, The shareholders, Alex cut him off. Let me show you what your system really costs shareholders. He pulled up the final set of documents, proof of Hayes's financial fraud, of stolen insurance premiums, of falsified safety records that exposed the company to massive liability. The confrontation had reached its turning point. In the harsh emergency lighting, surrounded by the workers he'd exploited and the evidence of his crimes, Hayes's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. The next few hours passed. In a blur of activity, federal agents swarmed the warehouse, collecting evidence and conducting interviews. Hayes and David Sullivan were led away in handcuffs, their protests falling on deaf ears as workers watched from the warehouse floor. The board members, still reeling from the revelations, had convened an emergency session to address the crisis. Alex stood in the middle of the warehouse floor, now dressed in his usual business attire, but wearing it differently, less like armor and more like a responsibility. Workers approached him one by one, sharing stories they'd kept hidden for years, each revelation adding to the weight of how much needed to be fixed. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah called, approaching with a stack of papers. "We've compiled a preliminary list of workers who need immediate medical attention. People who've been working through injuries, denied treatment, forced to hide their conditions." The list was heartbreakingly long. Alex recognized many of the names, faces he'd worked alongside during his time as Jimmy Parker. Each case represented a failure of the systems he'd created, twisted by Hayes into tools of oppression. "Get them treatment immediately," he ordered. "Use my personal insurance if you have to, and Sarah. Thank you for everything, for keeping records, for protecting people, for not losing hope." Maria approached next, leading a group of younger workers. "We've started documenting all the safety violations," she reported, her voice stronger now that the fear was gone. "There are hundreds of them, some dating back years. The maintenance team is already working on the most critical issues." In the loading dock area, Frank was organizing a team to properly catalog all the equipment issues that had been hidden or ignored. His hands still shook, but there was purpose in his movements now. "We'll need to replace most of the forklifts," he called out. Hayes's maintenance records were all falsified. Michael Sullivan, the OSHA investigator, emerged from a meeting with his team. "This is the largest worker exploitation case I've ever seen," he said, shaking his head. "The evidence is overwhelming. Hayes and Sullivan will be facing federal charges, along with several other managers who were involved." The board members, having concluded their emergency session, requested Alex's presence. But before he could head to the meeting, Jason stopped him. The young worker's eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "My dad," he began, then had to start again. "My dad always said Techlogics used to be different, that it used to care about people, not just numbers. Is that coming back?" Alex placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. "It's not coming back," he said firmly. "We're going to build something better, something that can't be corrupted again. And I'm going to need help from people who remember what it feels like to be treated like a number instead of a human being." The transformation had already begun. Throughout the warehouse, workers were emerging from the shadow of fear that had dominated their lives. The efficiency boards that had been used to punish and control were being repurposed to track safety improvements and maintenance requests. Lisa, no longer afraid of retaliation, had taken charge of organizing the worker compensation claims that had been buried or denied. "There are families who lost everything because of Hayes's policies," she reported. "Medical bills that were never covered, injuries that were never treated." "Make it right," Alex instructed. "All of it, whatever it costs." He turned to Marie, who had joined him on the warehouse floor. "We'll need to liquidate some assets, maybe take on some debt, but we're going to fix every bit of damage Hayes caused." The board meeting could wait. Alex moved through the warehouse, listening to workers, taking notes, seeing his company through new eyes. Every efficiency metric he'd created would need to be redesigned. Every policy would need to be rebuilt with safeguards against abuse. Tom, the maintenance worker who had helped expose Hayes's operation, was already redesigning the warehouses, monitoring systems. We can use the same technology to protect workers instead of exploiting them, he explained. Set up alerts for unsafe conditions, automate maintenance schedules, track actual break times instead of Hayes's fake numbers. In the break room, now crowded with federal agents taking statements, workers were sharing their hopes for the future. The fear that had kept them isolated was being replaced by a sense of community, of shared purpose. We need to document everything, Sarah insisted, organizing teams to collect testimonies, not just for the investigation, but for the future, so no one can ever do this again. Alex watched as his warehouse transformed from a place of fear to a center of activity and purpose. Workers who had been forced to compete were now collaborating. People who had been afraid to speak were finding their voices. The emergency lighting still cast harsh shadows across the warehouse floor, but they seemed less ominous now. In the loading bay, Frank was showing his granddaughter's picture to a group of workers, his smile no longer haunted by fear of retaliation. Marie appeared with an update from the board meeting. "They're waiting for you," she said, "but there's something you need to see first." She led him to the warehouse entrance where workers had gathered spontaneously. As he approached, they parted to reveal something that made his throat tight with emotion. The original TechLogic's mission statement, rescued from storage, dust still clinging to its frame. The words his father had helped him write 2 decades ago stood out clearly. To prove that efficiency and humanity are not opposing forces, but essential partners in building a better future for all. Dude, it wasn't just a company motto anymore. It was a promise that needed to be rebuilt, stronger this time, with protections forged from the hard lessons of Hayes's betrayal. The weeks following Hayes's arrest saw TechLogic's Boston warehouse undergo a transformation that went far beyond physical repairs. Alex had moved his office to the warehouse floor, converting Hayes's former surveillance center into an open workspace where workers could freely share concerns and ideas. The first major change came in the form of a complete overhaul of the safety systems. Tom led a team of workers in redesigning the warehouse's monitoring technology, turning Hayes's tools of oppression into instruments of protection. The AI system that had once tracked worker movements to maximize exploitation now monitored equipment conditions and environmental safety. "See this?" Tom demonstrated the new system to a group of workers. "If temperature levels rise above safe working conditions, the system automatically adjusts ventilation and schedules additional breaks. No override possible. Worker safety comes first, always." Sarah had been promoted to head of worker relations, a new position that reported directly to Alex. Her first action was to establish a worker advisory council, giving employees direct input into company policies. The council's inaugural meeting, held in the same boardroom where Hayes had planned to present his takeover, lasted well into the night as workers shared their visions for rebuilding their workplace. "Every policy gets reviewed by people who actually have to live with it," Sarah explained during a staff meeting. "No more decisions made in boardrooms by people who've never worked a warehouse floor." The insurance fraud investigation had revealed the full scope of Hayes's theft. Alex established a compensation fund, not just repaying stolen premiums, but covering all medical expenses that had been denied under Hayes's regime. Frank was one of the first to benefit, finally able to get proper treatment for his work-related injuries. "My daughter cried when she got the back payment check," Frank shared during a break room conversation. "Said it was enough to start a college fund for my granddaughter, but you know what meant more? Being able to take a sick day without fear of losing my job." The efficiency metrics that had been weaponized against workers were completely redesigned. Instead of focusing solely on speed and output, the new system measured workplace safety, proper break time usage, and worker well-being. Productivity was still tracked, but not at the expense of human dignity. "Look at these numbers," Maria pointed out during a team lead meeting. "We're actually more efficient now that people aren't exhausted and afraid. Turns out treating workers like human beings is good for business." Lisa, now heading the newly created Worker Advocacy Department, worked tirelessly to rebuild trust between management and employees. Every complaint that Hayes had buried was reviewed and addressed. Workers who had been wrongfully terminated were offered reinstatement with back pay. "It's not just about fixing past wrongs," Lisa explained to a group of visiting executives from other facilities. "It's about creating a system where workers feel safe reporting problems before they become crises." The physical transformation of the warehouse was equally dramatic. The blocked emergency exits were cleared and equipped with modern safety systems. The ventilation system was fully repaired and upgraded. New safety equipment was installed throughout the facility, with spares readily available to all shifts. Jason, who had shown leadership during the crisis, was appointed to head a new safety implementation team. His first project was creating a memorial wall honoring workers who had been injured or lost their lives due to Hayes's policies, including his own father. "This isn't just about remembering," Jason said during the wall's dedication ceremony. "It's about making sure it never happens again. Every safety protocol we implement, every protection we add, it's because we understand the human cost of cutting corners." The board had initially balked at the cost of these changes, but Alex stood firm. During a tense meeting with shareholders, he displayed the evidence of Hayes's true impact on the company's value, the hidden liabilities, the potential lawsuits, the brand damage that would have occurred when his abuses inevitably came to light. "We're not just rebuilding a warehouse," he told them. "We're creating a model for the entire industry, a proof that ethical treatment of workers and profitable operations aren't mutually exclusive." Michael Sullivan, the OSHA investigator, became a regular consultant as TechLogix developed new safety standards that exceeded federal requirements. The Boston warehouse was transformed into a training center where other companies could learn how to implement truly worker-centered operations. "What you're building here," Sullivan remarked during one of his visits, "it's going to change how the entire industry thinks about warehouse management." The most significant change, however, was in the workers themselves. The fear that had kept them isolated was replaced by a sense of ownership and pride. Break rooms became centers of innovation, where workers freely shared ideas for improvement. The efficiency that Hayes had tried to force through intimidation emerged naturally from a workforce that felt valued and protected. "You know what the biggest difference is," Frank observed one morning, watching the warehouse come to life. "People smile now. Actually smile, not just that nervous grin we used to wear when Hayes was watching." Alex had kept his Jimmy Parker uniform, framed it, and hung it in his office as a reminder. But the real reminder was in the daily operation of the warehouse, in the sound of workers calling out greetings to each other, in the buzz of collaborative problem-solving, in the sense of shared purpose that permeated every corner of the facility. 3 months after Hayes's arrest, the transformations weren't just visible in the warehouse's operations, they were evident in the people themselves. Each worker who had suffered under Hayes's regime found their own path to healing and growth, turning their experiences into strength that helped rebuild the company from within. Reeves, the supervisor who had taken such pleasure in tormenting new workers, underwent the most surprising transformation. After initially resisting the changes, he had a breakthrough moment during a mandatory empathy training session. Faced with testimonies from workers he'd harassed, including Jason's story about his father, something finally cracked in Reeves's hardened exterior. "I became what I hated," Reeves confessed during a warehouse-wide meeting, his voice thick with emotion. "When I started here, I was just like these kids, eager to work, wanting to prove myself. Hayes's system didn't just break workers, it turned supervisors into monsters. We thought we were being strong, but we were just passing on our own trauma." Under the new management structure, Reeves volunteered to be retrained from the ground up, starting again as a regular warehouse worker. His request to work alongside those he'd once tormented was met with initial skepticism, but as weeks passed, his genuine commitment to change became evident. Maria, who had once lived in fear of Reeves's write-ups, found herself in the position of training him on new safety protocols. The first day was awkward, she admitted during a team meeting, but watching him struggle with the same tasks he used to criticize us for, seeing him learn to ask for help instead of demanding perfection, it showed us that people can change when the system allows for humanity. Frank's transformation was physical as well as emotional. With proper medical care finally available, he received the back surgery he'd been denied for years. During his recovery, he started a mentorship program for new workers, turning his years of survival under Hayes's regime into wisdom that helped others adapt to the reformed workplace. "Used to be, experience meant knowing how to avoid getting hurt," Frank explained to a group of new hires. "Now it means knowing how to do the job right, how to help others, how to build something that lasts. My granddaughter visits the warehouse now. That's how much things have changed." Lisa, who had been paraded around as an example of Hayes's retribution, found her voice as an advocate for worker rights. She traveled to other TechLogic's facilities, sharing her story and helping implement the reforms that had transformed the Boston warehouse. The fear that Hayes had tried to instill became fuel for her mission to prevent similar abuses elsewhere. "Every time I walk into a warehouse now," Lisa said during a corporate training session, "I look for the signs I missed before. Not just safety violations, but the human signs. Are people making eye contact? Do they speak freely? Do they trust their supervisors to help rather than punish?" Sarah's transformation was perhaps the most profound. The quiet resistance she had maintained through years of documenting Hayes's abuses blossomed into powerful leadership. Her worker relations department became a model for the industry, with other companies sending representatives to learn how she had rebuilt trust between management and workers. The key was realizing that trust isn't just about policies, Sarah explained during an industry conference. It's about creating a space where people can be human first, workers second, where efficiency comes from collaboration rather than fear. Jason, still carrying the weight of his father's death, found purpose in ensuring other families wouldn't suffer the same loss. His safety implementation team didn't just enforce regulations, they actively sought out potential hazards, encouraged reporting of safety concerns, and celebrated workers who prioritized safety over speed. "My dad used to say that a warehouse is only as strong as its weakest safety protocol," Jason shared during a safety training session. "Now, we understand it's only as strong as its commitment to protecting every worker, every shift, every day." Even Tom, the maintenance worker who had helped expose Hayes's operation, underwent a transformation. His technical skills, once used to survive in a corrupt system, now drove innovation in worker safety. The monitoring systems he designed were being implemented across the industry, proving that technology could protect workers rather than exploit them. "The same cameras that used to spy on us now watch out for us," Tom explained to a group of visiting executives. "Same hardware, different purpose. It's all about the intention behind the technology." The corporate culture shifted as managers at all levels were required to spend time working alongside warehouse staff. The experience changed them in ways no training session could achieve. Executives who had once viewed workers as numbers, on spreadsheets now understood the human impact of their decisions. Alex himself continued to work regular warehouse shifts, maintaining the connection with floor operations that Hayes had exploited. His transformation from distant CEO to engaged leader inspired similar changes throughout the corporate hierarchy. Leadership isn't about control, he often said during management meetings. It's about creating an environment where everyone can lead in their own way, where every worker's experience and insight contributes to our success. The most powerful transformations were often the quietest, workers standing straighter, speaking more freely, offering ideas without fear of retaliation. The warehouse that Hayes had turned into a prison of fear became a place of possibility, where personal growth was celebrated alongside professional achievement. Every worker who had played a part in exposing Hayes's corruption found their courage rewarded, their resilience recognized, their humanity respected. The trauma of the past wasn't forgotten, but it was transformed into determination to build something better. 6 months after Hayes's arrest, the Boston warehouse had become unrecognizable, not just in its physical appearance or operations, but in its fundamental culture. The transformation was evident in ways both large and small. From the morning greetings that echoed through the facility to the collaborative problem-solving that had replaced fearful compliance. The former surveillance room, once Hayes's command center for monitoring and controlling workers, had been converted into what workers now called the Innovation Hub. Instead of screens displaying productivity metrics and worker movements, the walls were covered with employee suggestions, safety improvements, and celebration of team achievements. "Remember when we used to duck our heads every time we walked past this room?" Maria remarked during a team meeting. "Now it's where we come to share ideas, to build something better together." The room that had once symbolized oppression had become the heart of the warehouse's new culture. The change was particularly evident during shift changes, once a tense time of scrutiny and pressure. Now, outgoing shifts took time to properly brief their replacements, sharing not just operational updates but insights and suggestions. Workers from different shifts knew each other by name, looked out for one another, created a community that extended beyond work hours. "Last week my car wouldn't start after my shift," Frank shared during a community meeting. Time that would have meant written up for being late the next day. Instead, 3 people stayed to help, and Supervisor Jenkins actually drove me home. That's the kind of change you can't write into a policy manual. The warehouse's breakroom culture underwent a particularly striking transformation. Where workers had once eaten quickly and alone, afraid to be marked for socializing, now the space buzzed with conversation and camaraderie. Teams used lunch breaks for informal brainstorming sessions, sharing experiences and suggestions that steadily improved warehouse operations. Sarah had instituted what she called connection corners throughout the facility, designated areas where workers could pause for brief conversations without fear of reprimand. These spaces, marked by comfortable seating and positive messaging, became natural points for cross-team collaboration and problem-solving. "The best ideas don't come from pressure," Sarah explained to visiting executives. "They come from people feeling safe enough to think beyond survival, to imagine better ways of working together." The cultural shift was particularly evident in how new employees were welcomed. Instead of Hayes's intimidation tactics, new hires were paired with experienced mentors who guided them through their first weeks. The orientation process, once designed to break spirits, now focused on building confidence and community. "When I started under Hayes, my first day was all threats and impossible metrics," Jason recalled during a new hire training session. "Now we start by asking people about their goals, their ideas, their needs. We build up instead of breaking down." Safety protocols, once treated as inconvenient obstacles to productivity, became points of pride Workers actively participated in safety committees, suggesting improvements and holding each other accountable, not through fear, but through genuine concern for their colleagues' well-being. Yesterday, I saw a potential safety issue with a forklift, Tom announced during a morning meeting. Time was, we'd ignore it to avoid trouble. Now, 3 different workers reported it before I could even get to my phone. That's what real safety culture looks like. The warehouse's physical environment reflected the cultural transformation. Workers had been encouraged to personalize their spaces within safety guidelines, adding photos, positive messages, and team recognition boards. The sterile, threatening atmosphere of Hayes's regime had been replaced by an environment that acknowledged and celebrated its human elements. Even the efficiency metrics once used to punish and control had been reimagined to support rather than suppress human dignity. The new system, designed with worker input, measured success through a combination of safety, quality, and team collaboration alongside productivity. We still track numbers, Lisa explained during an industry presentation. But now we ask different questions, not just how fast, but how safely, not just how many, but how well, not just who's falling behind, but who needs support. The change was evident in small moments throughout each day. Workers stopped to help colleagues without checking metrics first. Supervisors asked about families, remembered personal details, treated their teams as people rather than resources. The rigid hierarchy of Hayes's system had been replaced by a fluid structure where good ideas were valued regardless of their source. Perhaps the most significant cultural shift was in how problems were handled. Instead of hiding issues out of fear, workers now openly discussed challenges and collaborated on solutions. The morning meetings, once dreaded sessions of criticism and threats, became forums for constructive discussion and shared problem-solving. Last month we had an issue with the new inventory system, Maria shared. Under Hayes, everyone would have blamed each other, tried to avoid responsibility. Instead, we got together, figured out the problem, and made it better. No fear, no threats, just people working together. The warehouse's reputation in the community had transformed as well. Once known as a place of exploitation and hardship, it became known for its positive work environment and opportunities for growth. Former employees who had quit under Hayes's regime began applying to return, bringing valuable experience and perspective to the renewed workplace. Alex, maintaining his practice of regular warehouse shifts, observed these changes with a mixture of pride and humility. The culture he'd originally envisioned for TechLogix, nearly destroyed by Hayes's corruption, had not just been restored, but strengthened through the crucible of adversity. 1 year after his undercover journey began, Alex found himself back in the warehouse bathroom where he had first transformed into Jimmy Parker. The mirror still hung on the wall, but the reflection it showed was fundamentally different, not just in appearance, but in understanding. During a special warehouse-wide gathering to mark the anniversary of Hayes's exposure, Alex shared his deepest reflections with the assembled workers. "A year ago, I thought I was coming here to investigate corruption. Instead, I discovered something far more important, the true meaning of leadership and the real cost of disconnection." The gathering was held in the warehouse's main floor, now transformed into a space that balanced efficiency with humanity. Workers sat in comfortable chairs that would have been unthinkable under Hayes's regime, sharing stories of the past year's transformation. "When I built TechLogix," Alex continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the facility, "I thought I could create perfect systems to protect workers. What I failed to understand was that systems aren't enough. They can be corrupted, twisted, turned against the very people they're meant to protect. True protection comes from connection, from never losing touch with the human impact of our decisions." Sarah stood to share her own reflection on the year's changes. We survived Hayes, not because of policies or procedures, but because we held onto our humanity, despite his attempts to strip it away. Now we've built something stronger, a workplace where humanity isn't just protected, it's celebrated. The lessons learned had been profound and far-reaching. Alex had discovered that his greatest failure hadn't been in creating systems that could be corrupted, but in becoming so removed from their implementation that he couldn't see the corruption happening. Every innovation I created, he admitted to the gathered workers, was built with the best intentions. But intentions aren't enough. We need constant vigilance, constant connection, constant awareness of how our decisions affect real people's lives. Frank, now fully recovered from his surgery and serving as head of the worker mentorship program, shared his perspective on the transformation. Under Hayes, we were all islands, each trying to survive alone. Now we're a community. When one of us struggles, we all step in. When one of us succeeds, we all celebrate. The growth hadn't just been organizational, it had been deeply personal for everyone involved. Lisa, who had once been paraded around as an example of Hayes' retribution, now led workshops helping other companies identify and prevent workplace exploitation. Fear doesn't make people more productive, she explained during the gathering. It just teaches them to hide problems until they become disasters. Real efficiency comes from people feeling safe enough to innovate, to speak up, to care about more than just survival. Jason, standing near the memorial wall that honored his father and others harmed by Hayes' policies, reflected on his own journey. I came here angry, looking for someone to blame for my dad's death. What I found instead was a mission, making sure no other family goes through what mine did. The gathering became a moment of collective reflection, with workers sharing how their perspectives had changed over the past year. Stories emerged of personal growth, of overcome fears, of rediscovered dignity. I used to jump every time a supervisor approached, Maria shared. Now, yesterday, I challenged a safety procedure in front of the whole team, suggested a better way to do it, and you know what? They listened. Actually listened and implemented my suggestion. Tom, whose technical skills had helped expose Hayes' operation, reflected on how technology's role in the warehouse had evolved. We still use cameras, still track metrics, still monitor operations. But now, these tools serve the workers instead of controlling them. It's the same technology, just guided by different values. Alex had learned perhaps the most profound lessons of all. I thought leadership was about creating perfect systems, he told the gathering. Now I understand it's about creating space for human dignity to flourish. Every policy, every procedure, every decision has to start with the question, how does this affect our people? The reflection extended beyond the warehouse walls. TechLogix had become a model for industry reform, with companies from around the world sending representatives to learn from their transformation. But Alex insisted that visitors spend time on the warehouse floor, understanding the human element of the change. You can copy our policies, he would tell visiting executives. You can implement our systems, but unless you understand the importance of human dignity, unless you maintain constant connection with your workers, you'll risk creating another Hayes. The gathered workers shared stories late into the evening, each reflection adding to the collective understanding of how far they'd come and how vigilant they needed to remain. The warehouse that had once been a place of fear and survival had become a center of learning and growth. A year ago, Alex concluded, I put on a disguise to find the truth about my company. What I discovered was the truth about myself, about leadership, about the real meaning of success. The measure of a company isn't in its profit margins or efficiency, metrics. It's in the dignity it provides to every person who walks through its doors. 18 months after Hayes' arrest, TechLogix's Boston warehouse hosted an industry conference unlike any other. Instead of executives meeting in luxury hotels, warehouse workers from across the country gathered on the facility floor to share experiences and shape the future of warehouse operations. Alex opened the conference from the loading dock, the same spot where he had first entered as Jimmy Parker. "We're not here to talk about maximizing profit or optimizing efficiency," he announced to the gathered crowd. "We're here to reimagine what a warehouse can be, not just a place of work, but a community of dignity and growth." The conference marked the launch of the Worker Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to transform warehouse operations industry-wide. Sarah, now TechLogix's Senior Vice President of Worker Relations, presented the initiative's core principles. "Every policy we implement," she explained, standing beside the former surveillance room, "must pass what we call the dignity test. Does it respect workers' humanity? Does it promote growth rather than fear? Does it build community rather than division?" If the answer to any of these questions is no, we go back to the drawing board. The initiative wasn't just about worker protection. It was about fundamentally changing how warehouses operated. Frank, speaking to a group of operations managers, demonstrated how TechLogix had redesigned their entire workflow around human needs, rather than just mechanical efficiency. "Look at our brake system," he said, pointing to the newly implemented rest areas scattered throughout the facility. "We didn't just make breaks longer. We studied when people naturally need rest, how different tasks affect fatigue, how team dynamics impact energy levels. The result? Higher productivity, fewer injuries, and workers who actually feel refreshed rather than just less tired." Maria led a session on communication transformation, showing how the warehouse had moved from Hayes's top-down intimidation to a collaborative network where information flowed freely in all directions. "Yesterday, a new hire pointed out a flaw in our inventory system," she shared. "Instead of being punished for questioning procedures, she was invited to help design the solution. That's the future we're building." The conference featured practical demonstrations of TechLogix's innovations. Tom showcased the new safety monitoring system, which had been redesigned with worker input to protect rather than surveil. "The same technology Hayes used to control people now serves them," he explained. "Cameras detect safety hazards before accidents happen. Sensors monitor environmental conditions to prevent worker strain. Data analytics identify patterns that help us make the workplace safer and more comfortable." Jason's presentation on safety culture drew particular attention. Standing beside the memorial wall, he shared how TechLogix had transformed safety from a set of rules to be followed into a shared responsibility. "Every worker here is empowered to stop operations if they spot a safety concern," he said. "And they do it without fear, because they know safety matters more than numbers." Lisa hosted a workshop on identifying and preventing workplace exploitation, drawing on her experiences under Hayes's regime to help other companies recognize warning signs. "The subtlest red flags are often the most important," she taught. "When workers stop making eye contact, when laughter disappears from break rooms, when people work through pain rather than report injuries, these are the early warnings of a toxic system." The conference's most powerful moments came from the worker panel discussions, where employees from different companies shared their experiences and visions for the future. Stories of both hardship and hope filled the warehouse floor, creating a tapestry of voices that had too often gone unheard in industry planning. "We're not just changing policies," Alex explained during the closing session. "We're changing the fundamental relationship between companies and workers. The future of warehouse operations isn't about finding new ways to push people harder. It's about creating environments where people can thrive while doing their best work." The Worker Dignity Initiative included concrete steps for implementation. Companies Joining the program committed to regular worker-led audits, transparent communication at all levels, and meaningful investment in employee development. Most importantly, they agreed to maintain constant connection between management and warehouse operations. Every executive in our company now spends at least 1 week per quarter working alongside warehouse staff, Sarah announced. Not observing, not evaluating, working, doing the same jobs, facing the same challenges, understanding the human impact of every decision they make. The initiative also introduced new industry standards for worker protection, going far beyond legal requirements. These included comprehensive healthcare coverage, education support, family-friendly scheduling, and clear paths for advancement based on merit rather than favoritism. Looking toward the future, Alex outlined TechLogix's next phase of innovation. We're developing technology that enhances human capability rather than replacing it, he explained. Automation that supports workers rather than threatens them. Systems that recognize human dignity as an essential component of operational excellence. The conference concluded with the announcement of the Worker Dignity Certification Program, a rigorous standard that companies could earn by demonstrating genuine commitment to worker welfare. Unlike traditional industry certifications, this one would be evaluated primarily by workers themselves. The future of warehouse operations isn't in some distant automation fantasy, Alex concluded. It's in recognizing that our greatest asset has always been the human beings who make everything work. Our job isn't to control them, but to create spaces where they can achieve their full potential. As the conference ended and visitors departed, the Boston warehouse stood as a living testament to this vision, a place where efficiency and humanity worked in harmony, where dignity wasn't just a word in a mission statement, but a daily reality in the lives of every worker. 2 years to the day after his undercover journey began, Alex Morrison stood in the same dimly lit motel bathroom where he had first transformed into Jimmy Parker. The cheap fluorescent light still buzzed overhead, but this time he wasn't practicing how to slouch or adjusting a disguise. He was preparing for something different, the national rollout of TechLogix's Worker Dignity Certification Program, which would begin where everything had started, in this modest motel on the outskirts of Boston. Tomorrow morning, CEOs from 50 major logistics companies would arrive, not in their usual luxury hotels, but in similar budget motels scattered throughout the industrial district. Each would receive a package containing warehouse uniforms, worn work boots, and basic toiletries, the same items Alex had used to become Jimmy Parker. For the next week, they would work incognito in their own facilities, experiencing firsthand what their workers faced daily. As Alex adjusted his tie, his real tie, not a thrift store purchase, he noticed something that made him pause. The mirror's scratch in the corner, the one he'd fixated on during his first transformation, had been repaired. The motel owner, upon learning the room's significance in TechLogix's transformation, had preserved it as a kind of unofficial landmark, making subtle improvements while maintaining its fundamental character. "Ready, Mr. Morrison?" Sarah's voice called from the other room. She had insisted on being here, arguing that every significant moment in their company's transformation should be witnessed by someone who had lived through Hayes's regime. "Almost," he replied, running his fingers over the repaired mirror. "Just remembering." The room's decor hadn't changed. Same faded wallpaper, same sagging mattress. But like the repaired mirror, its meaning had transformed. What had once been a place of disguise had become a symbol of revelation. The motel owner had started offering discounted rates to warehouse workers between shifts, turning it into an unofficial gathering place for the logistics community. Alex reached into his briefcase and removed a familiar red baseball cap, the one he'd worn as Jimmy Parker. It had been professionally cleaned, but still carried the subtle marks of warehouse work. Tomorrow, it would be displayed in Techlogix's new corporate museum alongside other artifacts from the transformation. Hayes's surveillance equipment, repurposed as a warning. The original letter that had prompted Alex's journey. The flash drive containing evidence of corruption. "The first group arrives at dawn," Sarah remarked, joining him in the bathroom doorway. "Some of them think this is beneath their dignity. Staying in a place like this, doing manual labor, just like you once thought." Alex nodded, remembering his own initial discomfort. "That's exactly why we're starting here. Dignity isn't about where you sleep or what work you do. It's about being valued as a human being, regardless of your position." Through the thin walls, they could hear the sounds of warehouse workers, returning from their shifts, tired voices, heavy footsteps, car doors closing. 2 years ago, those sounds had been part of Alex's disguise. Now they were reminders of the community he had rediscovered. The room's small desk held something new, a leather-bound journal. Starting tomorrow, each CEO who stayed in this room would record their experiences, their revelations, their moments of understanding. The journal would be passed from leader to leader, building a testament to the ongoing transformation of the logistics industry. "Frank stopped by earlier," Sarah mentioned, straightening a photo on the wall, a black and white image of the motel from the 1950s, when it had first opened to serve the industrial district's workers. "Left something for tomorrow's guests." She handed Alex a handwritten note, Frank's once shaky handwriting now steady and clear. "Welcome to the real world of logistics. Your workers already know this place, the thin walls, the hard beds, the flickering lights. The question is, will you learn to see it through their eyes, or will you just be playing a part?" Alex placed the note on the desk beside the journal. 2 years ago, he had stood in this room, practicing how to make himself invisible. Now he was teaching other leaders how to truly see. The motel room had become more than just a starting point for their industry's transformation. It was a threshold between two worlds, the corporate heights and the warehouse floor, that should never have been separated in the first place. Each leader who passed through would face the same choice Alex had, to treat their time here as a temporary discomfort or to embrace it as an opportunity for genuine understanding. Outside, the industrial district's lights created a familiar glow through the cheap curtains. Somewhere out there, night shift workers were clocking in, day shift workers were returning home, and the continuous cycle of logistics work continued. But now, thanks to the changes that had begun in this very room, that cycle no longer ground people down. It lifted them up, supported their dreams, respected their dignity. Alex reached into his pocket and removed his original disguise kit. The spirit gum, the fake scar, the brown hair dye. These tools of deception had led him to a deeper truth. Tomorrow, they would be sealed in a display case in the corporate museum, along with a plaque bearing words from his father. "The truth about any company lives on its lowest floors. Everything else is just pretty packaging." As he prepared to leave the room for the last time, Alex noticed something Sarah had placed on the bedside table, a framed photograph of the warehouse's current team taken during their recent holiday celebration. In the image, workers and managers stood together, their smiles genuine, their posture relaxed. It was meant as a message to tomorrow's guests, a glimpse of what was possible when dignity became more than just a corporate buzzword. "The cars. Ready?" Sarah announced. "Jason and Maria are waiting at the warehouse to help set up for tomorrow." Alex took one final look around the room where his transformation had begun. The mirror that had once reflected Jimmy Parker now showed something different, a leader who had learned to see clearly, not despite disguises, but because of them. As they closed the door, Alex remembered the last line of the anonymous letter that had started everything. "The truth might cost you everything you've built." The writer had been wrong about that. The truth hadn't cost him his company. It had helped him rebuild it into something stronger, something real. Tomorrow, a new group of leaders would begin their own journeys of transformation in this humble motel room. Some would resist, others would embrace the experience, but all would be changed by it. The room that had once hidden Alex's true identity would now reveal others' true characters. The motel's neon sign hummed in the darkness as they walked to the car, its light mixing with the glow of distant warehouse floodlights. In that illumination, the industrial district wasn't just a landscape of buildings and machines. It was a community of human beings whose dignity had been rediscovered. One transformed leader at a time. Copy.